Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Trump wants Venezuelan oil, but he can't get it. We got war in America. World War III alert. World War III alert. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Revolution is a way of life. Revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. Trump, dictator, war hungry, pretending like he's trying to fight narcos. Let's get into the content. Salute.
Having the worst day ever as his best friends are off partying without him. For reals. So Donald Trump is absolutely having the worst day ever as his best friends are off partying without him. For reals. That's the subject of today's video, and these are the headlines. Xi, Putin, and Kim show united front at huge Chinese military parade. And essentially, they're having a party without Trump. So this is them. There's your buddy Putin, Mr. Trump. There you got Xi, who Trump keeps trying to call, but Xi doesn't want to return his calls. And then you got Kim Jong-un, who Trump likes to write love letters to. So these are his best buds. And Trump's just like sitting at home going, why wasn't I invited? This is actually a Chinese account that's trolling Trump. It says, Trump is jealous of Xi Jinping. Jealous that it was Xi Jinping, not Trump, who stood in the reviewing stand, but it's actually pretty funny. Basically, what's going on right now is there's a show of force over in China, and that's Xi Jinping in the middle there. He's wearing the traditional communist suit that he'll do from time to time, and flanked by lots of world leaders. I mean, you can see in the picture, and there is a little bit of number pumping here, so I think there might be some world leaders brought their wives along to walk on the red carpet, along with some translators. And effectively, this is a way for Xi to pump up the number to make it look bigger than it is. But a lot of the countries did show, as you can see here. And they walked for a long ways. If you want to watch the whole parade, you totally can. This is also that was on here. Kim Jong-un takes his daughter to China and fuels succession chatter. So, maybe Trump is jealous that he didn't get to meet the whole North Korean, delegation. There's that. It's like, I want to meet the daughter. Why didn't you meet your daughter? But, it's funny with Trump because and when I tell you guys jealous, you'll see what I'm saying. He tweeted out this weird, bizarre thing. And that's why everyone's trolling him today. This was actually from Russia, the Russia Times. Trump leaves contradictory message. Warmest regards to Putin, Kim Jong-un, as you conspire against the United States of America. That's really what Trump is writing. And then calling on Xi Jinping to acknowledge, quote, U.S. contributions to China's World War II victory and sent. Someone sounds a little jealous. And this was our headlines in the USA, as they pointed out, to where Trump says China conspiring against U.S. with Putin and Kim meeting at military parade. Trump actually did tweet this out, though. And they have this weird picture of Trump. This is the official White House social media, but I don't know. It's kind of a weird picture of Trump. And then it just says like President Xi of China. I mean, you can see it right there. And then he's like, oh, warmest regards. And then you're conspiring against us. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. I mean, I know Trump's a baby, and I know he's basically, the tweeter toddler, or Captain Caplocks, however you want to call this guy. But even his buffoonery even surprises me sometimes. I mean, how petty can you get? This was actually a Chinese account that was trolling Trump. Another one, I think, is a reporter. He says, I feels like United States President Trump is souring today about China's V-Day commemoration for the 80th anniversary of the victory of World War II. And the basic idea, they're saying, Trump, there's more to the world than just USA. China also exists. He also tweeted out, this is again from a Chinese account. I'm glad to share my points on the Wall Street Journal. Most countries today have China, not the US, as their biggest trade partner. the US is building walls and China is building bridges, right? And it's just interesting to hear points of views on this. I don't necessarily disagree, but that's what it is. And then China, again, this is a Chinese account. They're saying, hey, look at all these countries that can fly visa-free to China. I actually didn't realize it was this many. So my wife is Korean, so I guess she doesn't need the visa to go there. USA is not on the list, so I would need a visa to go to China. So this is the Chinese military parade. It was pretty long, actually. And they played it live in Korea, believe it or not. And then they were commentating on what was going on with that. Yeah, you can see what they got. Looks like helicopter, helos, and I don't know if they showed jets in this one. I can't remember. A lot of soldiers marching is very, very different than the American one. So, and I think this is what Trump had in mind when he wanted to do the US one. It's like has how he seemed it, but the American soldiers weren't that motivated to do it. Where here, it's like, yeah, they're taking it pretty serious. Yeah, and then there's more vehicles, tanks, and such. Just guys give you a sense of what it looked like. There's drones, looks like, too, on the tank there. Yeah, so it looked like that. So that was the headline then. China flaunts military might with lavish parade and sends warning to Washington. And then you have this. What large-scale U.S. military action against Venezuela could look like? Like, what the heck? Basically, we're moving naval ships in the area. Now, are they going to put boots on the ground? Let's hope not. You just don't know with Trump. It's so erratic. They just announced they destroyed a Venezuelan vessel, killed 11. I showed you guys in the last video that. Now we have more of it. So basically, there's like this little ship. You can see it right there. I mean, it's just not big at all, right? And it's got I think it's got like 4 engines on it or something like that. And then they just blew it up. And it was. I thought this whole thing was strange, to be frank, because Trump was claiming terrorists and these kind of things. And when I read through this stuff, I don't think we know exactly where it was. I pulled up a map just to give you guys some reference. I don't think it was like off the coast of Miami or anything like that. I just don't think it was that close because from what I can tell, and if there's new information as a recording this video that please write in the comments, but I think it's probably like more in the Caribbean, maybe near Cuba or off the coast of Venezuela. I just don't think it's like near Miami or anything like that, but I could be completely wrong on that. Maybe it is. It just doesn't seem like that from what I read. And then even, let's say even if it is near Miami, it still seems strange just to basically blow it out of the water. I was looking at this, and this was kind of describing what you would normally do. And like, again, we don't normally do this, and I wanted to read through it with you. It says, John Feely, a former U.S. ambassador to Panama with experience in anti-drug operations in Latin America, said long-standing U.S. Coast Guard policies for stopping drug trafficking vessels involves cutters carrying a law enforcement detachment from the Coast Guard, right? So cutters being like ships, right? And that's the first thing that I was thinking too as well. Wouldn't this be a job for the Coast Guard, not the Navy, to hit these kind of things? The units are usually led by the Coast Guard officer with as much as 24 months of legal training who is deputized to make arrests, okay? After identifying a ship hauling drugs, the Coast Guard attempts to get the crew to stop and give up. Again, this sort of sounds like standard operating procedure. So you see this small vessel coming. It's not really like a threat. And you're the Coast Guard. I mean, and you got, all sorts of weapons and you're ready to go. And you're just like, stop. And just talk about, what you'd imagine it would be. You put the spotlight on the boat and you're just like loudspeakers, like this is your last warning, that kind of stuff. And then it says here, if the ship tries to flee, so run away, a sharpshooter manning a 15 caliber rifle aboard a helicopter can get the order to take out the engines, which again would makes sense of like how this normally plays out. That's why this Trump kind of aggressive stance of just blowing these small ships up seems just looking for, well, I mean, they're already fighting, but looking to instigate something. Let's read a bit more. Everything is done to preserve life, Feely said. What we don't do is just shoot up boats like Netflix likes to pretend. Like, so basically, the guy is saying like normal operating procedures, like we don't just shoot every stuff up like a movie, right? It's not like that. And you have to remember, Trump thinks of everything like a TV show. So that's why I think that he mentioned the Netflix stuff. So real life is not like Netflix. That's what he's saying. We can shoot in self-defense, but we rarely do that because most narcos just give up. And that, I mean, I can just see that scenario. You're a small ship. That's why I got to show you guys again. Just think logically. Sure, Trump's going to say that this is, dangerous, terrorists, etc. But you can see the ship for yourself. It's like what, 11 people on this thing, and then we're just blowing it up. And what are we using Navy, forces for this? It just seems ridiculous. Let me read some more. It also says the Coast Guard. So after they give up, I guess the Coast Guard then searches the boats for drugs. You don't know if there are drugs on board until you board. Which also makes sense, right? So Trump's going to claim, "Oh, we definitely know for sure. They're definitely terrorists like that." But this is coming from a guy at the Coast Guard. It kind of makes sense. Spokesman for the Pentagon referred questions to the White House. A spokesman for the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees U.S. military operations in Central and South America and the Caribbean, didn't respond to requests for comment. Interesting. So no one wants to make any comments on this, and they all just say, talk to the White, either no comment or talk to the White House. So that's kind of tells you all you need to know. And then this is coming from the White House. They say, the president is very clear that he's going to use the full power of America, the whole might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels. That's from Rubio. We're going to take on the drug cartels wherever they are and wherever they're operating against the interests of the United States. The problem is I mean, you guys know all these problems, is Trump keeps overstepping his bounds. Like, for example, here, this was just passed today. It says federal appellate panel rejects Trump's deportations under wartime law, right? This was the whole thing where Trump's trying to just deport people whenever he wants. The judges are like, no, you can't do that. I feel like all this stuff is going to go to the Supreme Court. So that's what's going on. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.
Tonight, we are unpacking a dangerous new chapter in global geopolitics, one that could trigger a direct clash between the world's two largest economies, America and China. Yes, you heard that right. An indirect but audacious Chinese move playing out not in Asia, but in America's own backyard. And if you've been following the news, tensions between Trump's America and Maduro's Venezuela are already spiraling. Last month, the Trump administration deployed submarines and warships close to Venezuelan waters. And just this Tuesday, things escalated dramatically when a US strike hit a Venezuelan vessel, killing 11 people. And now Venezuela is preparing to tilt the balance even further by buying dozens of China's most advanced J-10C fighter jets. Now, this isn't just about a weapons sale. It's about a strategic breach, a red line crossed that brings Chinese firepower within striking distance of Washington. Now, let's break it down. At the heart of this brewing storm is China's mighty J-10C, nicknamed the Vigorous Dragon. This isn't just another jet. It's a 4.5 generation fighter armed with PL-15 missiles that can destroy enemy aircraft more than 200 kilometers away.
And
It's fast, it's stealthy, and it carries advanced electronic warfare
any U.S. plane, any NATO plane, except our strategic bombers, that plane, that fighter jet will shoot it down. They just proved it in the India-Pakistan war. That plane is the plane that Pakistan was flying with those missiles, shot down the French Rafale, which is one of the world's most advanced fighter jets, shot 3 of them down versus India using this plane, this missile. Same thing will happen. Unless America has strategic bombers, they won't be able to use those F-16s, F-35, shit like that. That's not going to happen.
systems that until now US forces only faced in Asia or Eastern Europe. Now picture 20 of these dragons patrolling Venezuelan skies, just hours from Florida, Texas, and the Gulf Coast. And it's not just the jets. Think Chinese advisors, technicians, equipment setting up shop in Caracas, right on America's doorstep. For decades, Washington has treated South America as its uncontested buffer zone. But Beijing's growing footprint in Venezuela threatens to rip up that status quo. And this isn't just about a regional influence, it's about a global contest with nuclear weapons lurking in the background. And here's where things get even more dangerous. China is already the world's second largest nuclear power, and it's rapidly modernizing its arsenal. By positioning advanced fighters and possibly more assets in Venezuela, Xi Jinping is sending a blunt message. Beijing can challenge US dominance anywhere, even in your own backyard. And here's the risk. When two nuclear powers operate in such close proximity, the margin of error shrinks. One spark, one miscalculation, and an escalation that could spiral out of control faster than ever before. Who would have thought Washington would one day face the same looming threat it has long posed to others? Enter Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, fanning the fire with his trademark theatrics. Recently, he flaunted a Huawei smartphone gifted by Xi Jinping, boasting that American spies could never hack this phone. In his latest speech, Maduro gushed about Xi Jinping's leadership and praised China's mega military parade. Why such open loyalty? Because Maduro has very few allies left. Years of punishing Western sanctions have left Venezuela's economy in shambles, and his old patron, Russia, is too bogged down in Ukraine to keep supplying weapons. The Venezuelan Air Force is suffocating. Enter China, offering both military lifelines and political leverage, while simultaneously poking Washington where it hurts most. But don't think this is just about Venezuela. For more than 2 decades, Beijing has been courting Latin America with arms sales, training programs, military exchanges. Venezuela remains the region's biggest buyer of Chinese weapons ever since Washington banned arms exports to Caracas back in 2006. Earlier this year, Beijing even offered the same J-10Cs to Colombia. Cuba, meanwhile, has hosted Chinese military visits, and across Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, and Mexico, Beijing has signed strategic partnerships. In short, China is embedding itself in South America, mixing soft power with hard muscle. And globally, it's flexing too. At the recent Victory Day parade in Beijing, Xi Jinping stood with Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong un as ranks of PLA soldiers and weapons rolled through Tiananmen Square. From atop Tiananmen Gate, Xi delivered a chilling line. The world, he said, faces a stark choice between peace and war, dialogue and confrontation. And then he declared his greatest nation fears no one.
Today, humanity once again faces a profoundly significant choice between enduring peace and destructive war, between open dialogue and aggressive confrontation, between mutually beneficial win-win cooperation or a zero-sum game that benefits no one. The Chinese people firmly stand on the right side of history and on the side of human progress, adhering to the path of peaceful development and joining hands with people of all countries to build a community with a shared future for mankind.
This wasn't just political theater, it was a declaration. China is ready to challenge US dominance anywhere, anytime. So let's call it what it is. This isn't about Venezuela buying jets. This is Beijing drawing battle lines, marking the dawn of a new kind of great power conflict. A nuclear war fought thousands of miles away once seemed unthinkable. But with China's military moving into Venezuela, that nightmare feels chillingly closer. The stakes, nothing less than the balance of power in the Americas and the world. And the uncomfortable truth for Washington is this: its backyard is no longer safe. The world is watching, and so should you.
President in American history. See, he just carried out a surgical Navy strike on 11 Venezuelan drug gang members in a boat carrying enough fentanyl to kill 20 million Americans. He's like a modern day Thomas Jefferson killing Barbary pirates. Oh, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio says more strikes are coming. Warships are ready for war with Venezuela. Let's tie some yellow ribbons around our trees because a new war is coming. Maybe there's some babies in incubators as well that we can all rally around, but not so fast, because we shouldn't all just like walk like sheep and believe everything our government tells us. Not so fast. There's a lot of problems with what's about to happen in Venezuela, lots of unanswered questions. President Putin, Russian officials say this was a blatant act and the United States is exerting itself on other countries. So why exactly is America about to go to war with Venezuela? Did you guys sign up for that? We are not very smart around here. We need some education on exactly what in the hell is happening in Venezuela. And should we buy the government line that, hey, these narco-terrorists coming to the United States, we got to stop them? That's the main story. Colonel Douglas McGregor is here to explain the truth about what's really going on here and try to help us understand all of this. Colonel, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
So I'm a little unclear about the truth here. I mean, we're being told the official narrative is 11 terrorists, enough fentanyl to kill 20 million Americans, and we should all just rally around this. Marco Rubio says more strikes are coming. Do you buy this official narrative?
Well, I guess the answer is no. And I'm a friend of Jim Jatras, and it seems that Jim Jatras becomes more and more successful with each interview, and I attribute it to his beard. And he tells me if I grew a long beard, I'd be much smarter. The problem is I couldn't beard if my life depended upon it. So, well,
wiser. You're wiser.
Maybe that's a good prescription for President Trump. I don't know. You're asking the right question. I mean, first of all, by any legal assessment that I can find, this was an extrajudicial execution. This was not something within any sort of legal framework that anybody in the world takes seriously, certainly not within the legal framework of the United States. Equating terrorism and drug trafficking is something that you cannot do with the wave of a hand, which is essentially what President Trump has done. Now, I too have been asking the question, why at this point in time, when the Ukraine war is far from over, there are more people who are going to die over there until we see change in governments in Europe, which I think is coming, fortunately, and that will help. And I think we're going to see another round of warfare in the Middle East involving Israel and Iran and potentially other countries, including Russia and China. So the question is, in view of this, why now, out of the blue, is Venezuela at the top of everyone's target list? Now, we know that there were people like Elliot Abrams during the first Trump administration who was anxious to go to war against Venezuela and potentially others in Latin America. But why now? You know, we look at oil and gas. We know that they're at the top, in the top three of oil and gas reserves and potential. But the notion that somehow or another this is the driving factor doesn't really pass the smell test. Why? Well, we have thousands of technicians, oil and gas field engineers, people who, if they went back tomorrow to Venezuela, could begin rapidly restoring the Venezuelan oil and gas industry, something that would help the people of Venezuela, but also would be very good for us in the Western Hemisphere. It would make more sense to meet privately with the president of Venezuela and say, we know you've got problems. You've got too much of your population living in poverty. Instead of fighting over this, we could assist you in these areas.
Whatever.
These are some areas of interest to us. They also have gold mines and emerald mines. We could certainly benefit from converting some of our currency into gold again, certainly improving our position in that area. I mean, all of these things are swimming around in the back of my mind. And instead of this, we've now identified Maduro with massive drug trafficking. And I think it's also the mistaken notion that the arrival of a couple of hundred people from Russia or China, the parking of 2 Russian aircraft on the tarmac down in Caracas, is evidence for imminent intervention that's aimed at us by the Russians and the Chinese. It doesn't make any real sense. Maduro, frankly, has very little influence over his own general officers, to be frank. He probably has a little more influence than the president of Mexico has over the Mexican army, which is entirely under cartel influence and control. But, you know, again, why suddenly Venezuela, and why are we interested in destroying the place or invading it? Strategically, there's no benefit to it. And the third order effects are very dangerous. What happens in Colombia? What happens in Guyana? What happens in Brazil? I mean, the effects could be felt all the way to West Africa strategically. All in all, this is not a good idea. So why is he doing it? Is this to divert attention from obvious failures to bring the war to a close in Ukraine? Is this to divert attention from what is coming between Israel and Iran? There's no benefit to us. If anything, you could probably end up with more refugees trying to escape the carnage and find their way north to us, which is the last thing we need. Again, none of it makes any sense strategically to me.
This episode is brought to you by Rumble Premium, the home of free speech and exclusive content from the videos that matter. With Rumble Premium, you get ad-free viewing, access to exclusive shows, and premium features across the platform. The State Department posted earlier today that they don't care exactly what the United Nations said because the United Nations has condemned this. Marco Rubio says they don't know what they're talking about. We know what we're talking about. Glenn Greenwald posted about it, and then the State Department removed this tweet for whatever reason. I mean, I guess it's clear that the United States doesn't care what the United Nations says because we always go against whatever they say. I mean, it's not even a body that enforces anything. But what does this indicate? That the State Department is saying we're going to do what we want? Is that how you read that?
The world is diverging into 2 principal camps. You saw that recently in China. You saw Modi from India suddenly show up and effectively join hands with Moscow and Beijing. And all because the Indians said, we don't care to be bullied by the United States because it's in our interest to purchase Russian oil, refine it. We need it. We need the energy. And we're not going to be responsive to this demand that we be anti-Russian or anti-Chinese. And oh, by the way, we would like to bury the hatchet with China. We would rather get along with the Chinese and go to war with them. What I'm saying is there's also a divergence into two principal camps that has a lot to do with fiat currency. They want currencies backed by gold. They're looking for tangible, concrete backing for currency. That's the way they want to do business. There are lots of discussions. How will you do this? Will you have a central warehouse where all the gold is stored, and when transactions occur, gold is physically moved from one place to another? How are you going to do this? They're looking at all of this because they see our currency as worthless. If anything, it's a danger to them. The dollar has become a menace. And so this thing called de-dollarization, which has been underway for some time, is now accelerating. The world is running away from our currency because all we do is pass on debt to them. And they don't want to be debt slaves. They don't want to be enslaved by our debt and debt to us. So all of the institutions that came about after the Second World War, the IMF, the World Bank, all these things are now beginning to crumble, and we see new parallel institutions emerging on the other side of the world in the Eastern Hemisphere. The question is, what do we do? Can we go to a gold-backed financial system? Not right now. It's not possible. Then how do we rescue ourselves from a complete collapse of the dollar and a descent into a financial depression, which is arguably the path we're on? I don't think we have any easy answers. There's discussion about digital currency, but only if it's not controlled by the banks and holds real value as a result. We don't know, but the two camps are splitting. There is this divergence, and we are now turning to our affairs in the Western Hemisphere. And I think in the minds of people like Secretary Rubio and President Trump, suddenly doubling down on war with Venezuela is evidence for this new hemispheric focus, and is sending a message that if we can't be a global hegemon, then we plan to be the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, we're already the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. Nobody else in the Western Hemisphere is going to spend the kind of money we do on military power. But I think these things are rumbling around in their heads. But the problem is it's all impulsive. If you saw the movement of the flotilla from the East Coast of the United States, its assembly, and then movement south, it took far, far longer than originally envisaged. And that's because it's not thoroughly planned. I don't think there is a tightly, well thought out, knitted strategic plan for Venezuela or for anything in the Caribbean right now. I think all of this is, once again, which is very true for President Trump, impulse driven.
Someone in our chat room says, man, guys, get over it. It was just one boat. Of course, one boat leads to many other things. Another person in our chat, Tam McIntosh, says, this doesn't make any sense. The boat was 2,000 miles from the USA and did not have enough fuel to reach the coast of America. And Max Blumenthal, friend of the show and editor of the Gray Zone, tweeted this. This alleged strike on what looks like a common fishing boat will begin a series of criminal deceptions and false flags aimed at destabilizing Venezuela's government. Tren de Aragua was dismantled in 2019. It is gone. Trump's narco-terror designation is cover for invasion and resource theft. I mean, it's not just oil. There's a lot of resources in Venezuela. So, I mean, what do you make of that? It just seems, it all seems so fishy. Your point about the flotilla. What about Tren de Aragua as an actual organization? I mean, yes, we had gangs in the United States, but we're sort of painting this that like this boogeyman, that this like this massive Al-Qaeda operation in Venezuela. Is Max right?
Yeah, I think Max is essentially correct. The only thing I would add is that the drugs that do come out of Venezuela come out of Colombia, cross the border, and then are moved from Venezuela elsewhere. Now, some of that comes to the United States, no doubt. Some of it goes to Cuba. There are a number of destinations for it. The real danger, though, because you mentioned it earlier, well, we blew up a boat. We're trying to create a casus belli. In other words, we're looking for an excuse to take dramatic and decisive action against the Venezuelan government to replace Maduro. It's regime change again. That's at the heart of this. Do we have others involved in this? Sure. There's evidence that there are mercenary forces in Colombia as well as in Guyana, probably connected to the CIA, that are probably willing and ready to go into Venezuela to destabilize the place. with the hope of creating enough chaos that we from offshore, plus our agents ashore, could remove Maduro. Again, this is all nonsense. It's a throwback to a regime change philosophy that has failed repeatedly over and over and over again and produced nothing but chaos. So the real question is, if you're president of the United States and somebody brings this to you and says, hey, boss, this is a really great idea. We're so powerful, they can't stand against us. Whatever we do will work. We can sell this to the American people easily. Simply say these people are in the middle of the drug war. We have to crush them. Well, it sounds an awful lot like the argument that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was based on. It was not true. It was a lie. It was flimsy, but it was packaged and sold successfully. And a lot of Americans are not going to look at the fine print. They're just going to say, oh, well, drug peddlers, drug smugglers, they deserve the worst. Kill them, without understanding what's really going on.
Yes, it's capitalizing on our legitimate outrage about the fentanyl crisis and our immigration crisis. So it's well positioned to succeed if we don't look at the nuance. You're right about that.
That's how false flags work.
I would point out one other thing for your audience. They need to go back and listen to Lee Kuan Yew. He's passed away, but he was the man that created Singapore for all intents and purposes. And he was specifically questioned by the BBC before he died about his policies for drug enforcement. And his policy was very simple. If we catch you coming into, or you are inside Singapore, transporting, smuggling, and effectively distributing drugs illegally, we will execute you. And of course, Singapore was near collapse, as was Malaysia at the time. And you know what? It worked. You didn't have to execute very many people consistently before everybody understood what the penalties were. And that addresses something that we don't ever talk about. The problem begins here at home, inside the United States, not in Venezuela. Venezuela or Colombia or anybody else wouldn't have a market if we were not adequately defending our borders, if we were not enforcing our laws, and if we did not make people pay the ultimate penalty. Because one drug salesman, one drug peddler destroys the lives of thousands of Americans. That's what has to stop.
Coming up is the national conversation, a big event that the Colonel will be in attendance. He will be headlining it, really. And I want to play this promo, and hopefully you guys can go and see the Colonel in person. Watch.
Come see me on tour in Appleton, Wisconsin, Rosemont, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, Louisville, Fort Wayne, Hermosa Beach, Sacramento, San Francisco, Irvine. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. So here's Trump is going after Venezuela. As soon as you find out that Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia, you know why Donald Trump tried to overthrow Venezuela in his first term, why the United States government has been trying to overthrow them for 30 years. And why he's trying to do it again. And he's doing it under the guise of fighting drugs. Here's what he said.
When you come out and when you leave the room, you'll see that we just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat. And you'll be seeing that and you'll be reading about that. It just happened moments ago. And our great general, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's been so incredible, including what took place in Iran, knocking out potential nuclear power for a long time to come. I think within a month they would have had it. We didn't do what we did. But he gave us a little bit of a briefing, and you'll see. And there's more where that came from. We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. And we just, these came out of Venezuela. and coming out very heavily from Venezuela. A lot of things are coming out of Venezuela. So
Yeah, oil.
we took it out, and you'll get to see that after this meeting is over.
So I'm going to show you why that's a lie, what he's saying about the drugs coming out of Venezuela. But first, I'm going to show you the real reason that Donald Trump and every president has been trying to overthrow Venezuela. And here he is going to admit it. Donald Trump admits it, what it's all about. They want to steal their oil.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
So that's why they put economic sanctions on Venezuela. That's why they want to get rid of Maduro. It's because they want to steal their natural resources. The same reason we overthrew Iran. The same reason we did Iraq. The same reason we did Libya. It's always the same goddamn reason. Donald Trump left troops in Syria. Why? For the oil. And how do I know that? He said so. And here's why what he said about the drugs coming out of Venezuela isn't true. For reference, this is a picture showing actual data about drug routes from the U.S. government themselves. Note how Venezuela is indeed the place where drugs do not flow to the USA. Once again, this is according to the U.S. own official data. Let me put it. It's not coming. Here's Venezuela. Drugs are not coming from Venezuela to the United States, ladies and gentlemen. Latin America narcotics connection, maritime trafficking. This is Venezuela. This is where the drugs are coming from. That's August 31st, 2025. This is their own data. This is Venezuela. This is where the drugs are coming from. So the drug cartel state is actually Ecuador, but it's a U.S. vassal, so who cares? Huh. Declassified video showing the U.S. committed a war crime when it fired on a civilian vessel near Venezuela. Being suspected of carrying drugs does not carry a death sentence, and certainly not one without due process. So there's this boat that they say was carrying, look at this boat. This is the boat they said that they blew up because it was carrying drugs. You see how tiny that boat? I thought it was going to be like a giant ship. It's a literal little boat. The difference between a boat and a ship. That's a boat. And they say, oh, it was full of drugs. So, and by the way, they say that anyway, Justin Amash, he says Congress has not authorized military hostilities against Venezuela. There's no exception permitting unilateral action because it's drugs or terrorism or a designated organization. The peace president strikes again. Here it is from the AP. Trump says U.S. strike on vessel in Caribbean targeted Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang and killed 11 people. Well, guess what? Former Philippine President Duterte is in custody in The Hague right now. Why? Because he's being charged by the International Criminal Court for ordering the summary execution of alleged drug traffickers. Trump just ordered the summary execution of 11 alleged drug traffickers. President Donald Trump said Tuesday the U.S. has carried out a strike in the Southern Caribbean against a drug-carrying vessel that departed from Venezuela and was operated by the Tren de Aragua gang. No proof provided of any of that. The president said in a social media post that 11 people were killed in a rare U.S. military operation in the Americas, a dramatic escalation in the Republican administration's effort to stem the flow of narcotics from Latin America. That's not what he's doing. That's not what this is about. Trump also posted a short video clip of a small vessel appearing to explode in flames. The strike occurred while the terrorists were at sea in an international waters transporting illegal narcotics headed to the United States, Trump said. No U.S. forces were harmed in the strike. Please let this serve as a notice to anybody even thinking about bringing drugs into the United States. I'll show you again that map. This is not where the drugs are coming from. This is where the oil is. The video appears to show a long multi-engine speedboat traveling at sea when a big bright flash of light bursts over the craft. The boat is then briefly seen covered in flames. The video, which is largely in black and white, is not clear enough to see if the craft is carrying as many as 11 people. The video also did not show any large or clear stashes of drugs inside the boat. And that's why they're saying it's AI. They're saying this is AI. So there's the boat. There's the boat. Do you see 11 people in there? Do you see large caches of drugs? So they're saying this was AI. So there's the boat. This is what your military is doing, ladies and gentlemen, to try to intimidate a country so we could steal their oil. Try to destabilize a country so we could go in there and steal their oil. There it is. So that's the big flash of light. And they say that's AI. They're saying that's not even real. Tren de Aragua originated more than a decade ago at an infamously lawless prison with hardened criminals in Venezuela's central state of Aragua. The gang has expanded in recent years as more than 7.7 million Venezuelans fled economic turmoil and migrated to other Latin American countries or the U.S. Why do you think those 7.7 million Venezuelans fled Venezuela? Because the United States put sanctions on that country to make life miserable for people, so they would overthrow their government, so then we could come in and install a puppet and steal their oil. Well, that didn't happen. 7.7 million people left. And where'd they go? They came to the United States. Trump and administrative officials have repeatedly blamed the gang for being at the root of the violence and illicit drug dealing that plagued some cities. And the president on Tuesday repeated his claim, contradicted by a declassified U.S. intelligence assessment that Tren de Aragua is operating under Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's control. So even their own U.S. intelligence doesn't say this. Trump is just making this up. Just like he made up that Epstein is a left-wing hoax. He just makes stuff up. He's making this up. The White House did not immediately explain how the military determined that those aboard the vessel were Tren de Aragua. How do you even know? The size of the gang is unclear, as it is the extent to which its actions are coordinated across state lines and national borders. Maduro did not address the strike directly, but charged that the U.S. is coming for Venezuela's riches. Of course they are. The South American country has the world's largest oil reserves. From the neighborhoods of Caracas, I tell you, there will be peace in Venezuela with sovereignty. Communications Minister Freddy Núñez questioned the veracity of that video. Based on the video provided, it's very likely that it was created using artificial intelligence. He couldn't say what tools would have been used to create that video, but said it showed an almost cartoonish animation rather than a realistic depiction of an explosion. Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio first announced the strike earlier Tuesday, shortly before Rubio left on a trip to Mexico and Ecuador for talks on drug cartels, security, tariffs, and more. In a brief exchange with reporters before departing Miami for Mexico City, Rubio deferred questions about the specifics of the strike to the Pentagon. He said the drugs on that vessel were likely headed to Trinidad or elsewhere in the Caribbean. So now we're patrolling Trinidad. We're doing international policing on behest of Trinidad? Here he is saying it. Here he is.
The president is going to be on offense against drug cartels and drug trafficking in the United States. It destabilizes not just the country, but the entire Caribbean basin. These particular drugs were probably headed to Trinidad or some other country in the Caribbean, at which point they just contribute to the instability.
So that's it. We're all too aware of the notorious and ongoing instability caused by drugs flooding into the nation of Trinidad. Huh.
What a joke.
For years, Marco Rubio has spoken out against Maduro and other Latin American leftist governments and supported opposition leaders. Why? Because Marco Rubio is bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry and the military-industrial complex. That's why. In 2018, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. In 2018, during Trump's first term, Rubio told Univision that there was a strong argument to be made for the use of U.S. military in Venezuela. So they're just shifting the reasons why now. They're not just making up a whole new reason. Before it was Maduro was a dictator. Herman is like, we have to go protect the people of Venezuela. We got to bring their people some democracy and steal their oil. He's also accused Venezuelan officials of aiding drug traffickers. Asked if Trump would carry out operations on Venezuelan soil, Rubio was opaque. We're going to take on drug cartels wherever they are and wherever they're operating against the interests of the United States. I bet they're operating right around the oil fields in Venezuela. Maduro has insisted that the U.S. is building a false drug trafficking narrative to try to force him out of office, which is exactly what's happening. So there's your peace president, Donald Trump, starting wars all over the place. Iran, bombing Yemen, funding a genocide, sanctioning, continuing to send arms to Ukraine, putting sanctions on India for buying oil from Russia, putting sanctions on Russia, and now doing this. He and other government officials have repeatedly cited a United Nations report that shows traffickers attempted to move only 5% of the cocaine produced in Colombia through Venezuela. Landlocked Bolivia and Colombia, the access to the Pacific and Caribbean, are the world's top cocaine producers. So it's Colombia and Bolivia. It's not Venezuela. The latest UN World Drug Report shows that various countries in South America, including Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, reported larger cocaine seizures in 2022 than in 2021. But it does not assign Venezuela the outsized role that the White House has in recent months. The impact of increased cocaine trafficking has been felt in Ecuador in particular, which has seen a wave of lethal violence in recent years linked to both local and transnational crime groups, most notably from Mexico and the Balkan countries. Maduro on Monday told reporters that he would constitutionally declare a republic in arms if his country were attacked by the United States forces deployed in the Caribbean. So, a strike carried out by the U.S. forces on a boat in the Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. The U.S. is not a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but the U.S.'s military's legal advisors have previously said that the U.S. should, quote, act in a manner consistent with its provisions. What provisions? The provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And what does it say? Under the convention, countries agree not to interfere with vessels operating in international waters. There are limited exceptions to this, which allow a state to seize a ship, such as in hot pursuit, where a vessel is chased from a country's waters into high seas. Force can be used to stop a boat, but generally, this should be non-lethal measures. But he added that the use of aggressive tactics must be reasonable and necessary in self-defense, where there is immediate threat of serious injury or loss of life to enforcement officials, noting that the United States the moves they just did, were likely unlawful under the law of the sea. So under Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, countries can resort to force when under attack and deploying their military in self-defense. Trump has previously accused the Tren de Aragua cartel of conducting irregular warfare against the United States, and the State Department has designated the group as a foreign terrorist organization. But professional Michael Becker of the Trinity College Dublin told BBC that the U.S. action stretches the meaning of the term beyond its breaking point. The fact that U.S. officials describe the individuals killed by the U.S. strike as narco-terrorists does not transform them into lawful military targets. The U.S. is not engaged in an armed conflict with Venezuela or Tren de Aragua criminal organization. Not only does the strike appear to have violated the prohibition on the use of force, it also runs afoul of the right to life under international human rights laws. So this is Donald Trump bringing an era of peace, and there he is breaking every international law to kill people and try to start wars for oil. Professor Moffat said that the use of force in this case could amount to an extrajudicial arbitrary killing and a fundamental violation of human rights. Labeling everyone a terrorist does not make them a lawful target and enables states to sidestep international law. But the U.S. officials have been quick to defend the strike. Lindsey Graham wrote on X that the strike was ultimate and most welcome sign that we have a new sheriff in town. His fellow Republican Senator Bernie Moreno from Ohio wrote, sinking this boat saved American lives. To the narco traffickers. And so this is, again, they're all just tools. Questions have also been raised as to whether the White House compiled the U.S. law in authorizing the strike, complied with the U.S. law in authorizing the strike. The U.S. Constitution says that only Congress has the power to declare war. However, Article 2, which lays out the president's power, says that the president shall be commander-in-chief of the army, and some constitutional experts have suggested that this grants the president the power to authorize strikes against military targets. Trump's administration sources have previously cited this provision when defending U.S. strikes on Iran. Hegseth says boat strike is a start of a campaign against Venezuelan cartels. The defense secretary says President Trump said a small boat was carrying drugs, but offered little evidence and few details. So there's your next war. It's in Venezuela. Congratulations. This is not what anybody voted for. Nobody. Congratulations. So there's only one bright spot in Trump's administration. The rest are dark spots. Very dark.
To another critical situation, that is, well, what I feel you could call U.S. threats against Venezuela and other countries in Latin America in terms of the deployment of a amphibious warfare flotilla into the Caribbean Sea there. We are very, very happy to be joined to continue our conversation on this topic and more by Manolo de los Santos, who is the Executive Director of the People's Forum and a researcher at the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, very august platform. Manolo, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you again for having me, Ronnie and Eugene.
Well, great to have you with us. I mean, I wonder how you're interpreting the U.S. moves here. I mean, they're sending, amphibious assault ships. They're sending the Marine Expeditionary Force, all of the people who basically advertise themselves as invasion forces, but they're selling this as some sort of law enforcement operation against cartels in South America. Is this just trying to protect the children of America against the inflow of drugs, or is this something a little more sinister, Manolo?
Well, I would clearly say that it has nothing to do with the so-called war on drugs, which for people living in the United States, we've known it's been a farce in our own communities for 50 years now. This has much more to do with the fact that the Trump administration, the US government, is essentially making a full-on, full-scale assault on the independence of Latin American countries. They're contesting hegemony in the region, and they see a clear target, Venezuela, which in my opinion, continues to stand as not just one of the most sovereign countries in the region, but as a clear impediment to the U.S. designs to take control of the region.
Yeah, I mean, Manolo, it's like so insane. It's like the mob bosses are just getting it more and more insane. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, can you expand on, because we keep hearing this narco state label. We hear these very specific numbers that Maduro is responsible for like this much, cocaine and $50 million bounty on his head over it. Can you actually talk about not just the fact that there's zero evidence that this narco state label actually applies, but on top of that, it's the other way around. It's the U.S. that's largely involved in the drug trade across Latin America?
Well, when I talk about stats regarding this question, I always start with the fact that the US continues to be the world's largest consumer of drugs. I say that again, the world's largest consumer of drugs. And that the DEA itself, the Drug Enforcement Agency in the United States itself, recognizes how the networks that facilitate the US being the world's largest consumer are precisely within the US, within all 50 states. And they implicate a number in a series of people and entities across the US that never really get talked about. It's so much easier to talk about the threat of Venezuela without actually giving any specifics. And when I was looking recently at actually the DEA's own national threat reports, a report where they actually assess where is the threat of drugs incoming to the US from? And the reports for both 2024 and 2025 never mention at all this so-called Cartel de los Soles that is constantly now being mentioned by right-wing media in the United States. And to make it even bigger point, they don't really mention Venezuela either. In fact, the focus of the reports tends to be on cartels in Mexico, which we have known for some time depend greatly on their partners in the US, sometimes even partners within US agencies, government agencies. So again, is it really about the facts? Is Venezuela really a threat? When we look at what's actually happening next door to Venezuela, in Colombia, which is, if not the largest, one of the largest producers of drugs in the region. It's a country where there are actually 7 US military bases that are particularly targeted towards so-called combating drugs. And there are 3 DEA offices in Colombia, yet the production of drugs in Colombia has only increased. So what is that to say about US priorities and what the real motive is behind threatening Venezuela?
You know, Manolo, since 1998, the broader political process in Venezuela has been known as the Bolivarian Revolution. And I think in the United States, not a lot of people know who Simón Bolívar is. But I was thinking about this in the context of what we've seen over the past few days, where people have been signing up for the militia to fight if necessary, if the country is invaded. And that spoke so much to me about, you know, cutting through the demonization, what has been happening since 1998 in Venezuela, and the issues of sovereignty, not just of Venezuela, but of Latin America, that are so deeply at the root of this historical process and that are so offensive to people that they would sign up to potentially, you know, fight and defend their country. And I don't know really exactly where I'm going with this, but I was hoping you could just talk about that, because I just think it's a sort of an interesting commentary on, you know, beyond the propaganda, why Venezuela has had this process since 1998 that, despite so many threats and so many screws turned against it, has not fallen.
Eugene, I am so glad you raised 1998, because it's a pivotal year. It's the beginning of a complete transformation inside Venezuelan society around something that the US cares a lot about, which is oil, Venezuela's natural resources. Venezuela has, as of now, the largest proven reserves of oil. Over 303 billion barrels of oil are estimated to be under Venezuelan soil. And in 1998, and since then, the Venezuelan people who've taken power in their country have essentially decided that the wealth produced by this oil and by their other mineral resources are meant to stay at home and develop their own country. They're no longer meant to just flow north in direction to the US to make certain billionaires in Texas and in Washington, D.C. filthy rich. And that has actually created a situation that has pit US foreign policy directly and frontally against Venezuela since 1998 for one reason or another. And I think, you know, when people today in Venezuela, across the political spectrum, actually, not just people on the left, see their country being threatened by US military forces reaching their shores, the majority response of people, again, across the political spectrum, left to right, has been defend the homeland, defend their country, defend their resources, because that is what has allowed the country, whether one likes it or not, to chart its own path, to chart its own future, and to secure the well-being of its people, which contrasts with everything that took place before 1998, when you could say Venezuela was nothing more than a neo-colony of the United States.
And then Manolo, can you talk a bit about the way that sanctions play a role, kind of, you know, reinforcing this hybrid war? I mean, you have the whole military threat under the guise of fighting drugs. But for a long time, Venezuela has not been allowed to prosper because the US has enforced these really suffocating sanctions to try to basically rig, or I'm sorry, it's very late for me, so I'm like stumbling on words, but has basically tried to place many obstacles in the way of Venezuela's socialism succeeding.
Well, I think going back to history is important for us, because what we're seeing now, in a sense, is not new. It's simply another development in the long process of US hybrid war, as you mentioned, against Venezuela. I mean, we go back to 2002, 2003, 2005. And since then, we've seen everything from coups sponsored by the US government to overthrow a democratically elected government. We have seen assassination attempts against its political leaders. We have seen all sorts of attacks. And the latest round being heavy sanctions, particularly after 2014 and 2015, which have essentially strangled the Venezuelan economy, particularly its ability to sell oil on the global market. And the US single-handedly, I would say, created a situation where Venezuela's economy plummeted overnight because of the lack of resources coming from oil sales. Over the years, Venezuela has tried to recover, it has had to diversify its economy. But the fact is that US sanctions have had a terrible impact on Venezuelan society beyond just its economy. There are recent reports, in fact, by CEPR, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, that were pointing out that over the last few years, US sanctions, not just on Venezuela, but on majority of countries around the world, have caused over 500 deaths on an annual basis. Many of those deaths in Venezuela itself. So I think the other thing to just mention, because I think it's important for understanding our narrative, is that the United States has never really cared about Venezuela. All it cares is about taking control of Venezuela's resources, its oil, its minerals, its gold. And over the years, it's had to change its narrative. It's had to change the message. Over a few years, it was that the US was supposedly concerned with defending democracy. All of a sudden, it's made a real sort of veer to the right and sort of said, well, democracy is not so important for us in Venezuela. What really matters is that the Venezuelans are involved in the drug trade. No one in Latin America believes this joke. The Mexican president openly said there's no legitimacy to these claims. The Colombian president has also denounced this. It's almost clear to anyone with common sense that Trump is talking out of his ass. So is the United States government.
Mm. Well, I think one of the things that's also important to note here is that Venezuela, despite all of these challenges and threats against it, has not changed either its internal domestic policies or its international policies to conform with the United States. And I mean, it's continued to speak out, in defense of the Palestinian people and their right to exist. One of the very few countries in the region and in the world that opposed the MSS, sort of neo-colonial occupation of Haiti. I mean, Venezuela continues to stand as a beacon despite of anti-imperialism, some might say, despite all of this. And it seems like that also has to be getting under the skin of Trump and friends.
Well, I think the Venezuelans have learned very well from what's happened in the rest of the world, from looking at Libya, from looking at Iraq, from looking in other parts of the world. Making concessions to the US doesn't make you safer. Agreeing with the US does not make you safer. Saying yes to Trump doesn't make you less worthy of attacks by Trump himself and the US government. So I think they've taken the position of dignity, of defending their sovereignty, of being independent, regardless of what the cost may be. And I think they're right for doing so. And I think in doing so, they're giving an example to anyone else on the planet who wants to live free of the US empire.
And I also want to ask Manolo, in terms of solidarity, is Venezuela receiving any regional solidarity here, whether it's from institutions and alliances or specific countries?
Well, I think it's been interesting to see where the chips fall regarding Venezuela, because on one hand, you've seen, again, countries like Mexico, Colombia, others in the Caribbean who have stood out in defense of Venezuela's sovereignty and independence. China has come out and has forcefully defended Venezuela's sovereignty and independence. But you also have seen how some countries have stooped to the level of the US regime and essentially offered themselves to be launching pads for US intervention against Venezuela, like Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. It's a shame that fellow Latin American countries, fellow members of the Caribbean, essentially, for what will ultimately be crumbs of whatever they can get from the US, essentially will be okay with a war that it's not just against Venezuela, but that would have major catastrophic implications for all of the region.
Well, a lot to watch here. This is a very dynamic situation. Obviously, the U.S. ships and troops are there and moving. So we'll continue to watch this, continue to follow this. And certainly we will bring you back, I'm sure, Manolo, to keep discussing this.
4,500 sailors near Venezuela back up Washington's claim of a counter-narcotics operation?
They try to bully now what they conceive as a softer target of Iran, which Israel basically failed.
U.S. have been trying to cause regime change in Venezuela.
There's a major refining circuit in southern U.S. from Mississippi up to Illinois that basically depends on Venezuelan heavy crude.
The United States have a very strong interest to take control of the Venezuelan oil like they used to. China is investing in Venezuela. What the United States fear is that China will increase its investment into Venezuela.
There are many presidents that are more than happy to kiss the ring. That's a tragedy of this.
They have not succeeded. They will not succeed this time.
Hello and welcome to Iran Talks. My name is Samar Hakim, your host for the program. In recent months, tensions between Caracas and Washington have entered a new phase. The US recently doubled its reward to $50 million for information leading to President Nicolas Maduro's arrest, accusing him of being one of the world's largest drug traffickers. This has coincided with deepening Tehran-Caracas cooperation and Beijing's political positioning. While Washington frames its action as part of a fight against cartels and trafficking, critics view this as a broader effort aimed at regime change and at containing an emerging Iran-Venezuela-China alliance. This all comes as Washington dispatches a large military force near Venezuela. Joining me to discuss this issue today is Carl Zah and Diego Sequeira, political commentators. Welcome to the program. The first question I want to start off with is, does the U.S. deployment of 3 warships, 4,500 sailors, 22,000 Marines near Venezuela back up Washington's claim of a counter-narcotics operation, or is this, just a scene to, sort of destabilize the Iran, China, and Venezuela alliance? Carl, I'll start off with you.
United States decide to go for a target closer at home, right? Because it wasn't able to bully Iran, or it obviously can't bully China. So now it tries to focus on its own neighborhood to impose a modern-day Monroe's Doctrine on Venezuela. But the 4,000 troops that they deploy, that won't. I mean, this will just be a replay of Bay of Pigs if they try to do a military intervention against Venezuela. By the way, nobody believes their narrative that this is for anti-narcotics operation. That's just how U.S. justifies military intervention in Latin America. That's what they use to justify the invasion of Grenada, of Panama, but 4,000 troops, that won't make any difference. If they're gonna bring that 4,000 troops to Venezuela, we're just gonna see the modern day Bay of Pigs play out all over again.
Okay, and Diego, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree with Carl. First, the reasons. I mean, if you take the big picture, one of the main reasons is precisely what Carl said. It's basically unable to make any significant shift in other places of, let's call it Brzezinski-wise, the chessboard. They try to bully now what they conceive as a softer target instead of Iran, which Israel basically failed at that moment, as we know. So it also plays, that's for that big layer. There's a second one here that also needs to be taken into account. Given that this new administration has a different approach, especially because of Marco Rubio, regarding the region and regarding the projects of how to reboot in some way or another empire, they need to do their own hemispheric strengthening before, they're building the wall now. It's not dividing Texas from Mexico. Basically, it's a hemispheric wall now, especially to protect, quote unquote, protect the region from foreign actors, just like China and Iran or Russia, for that matter. And Venezuela, of course, it's like the reception point, politically speaking and diplomatically and trade-wise speaking, of the region. But there's a third layer here, and which also has to do with U.S. context, and it has to do with the southern crisis, like Axios call them, the Florida crisis, as in the need for Trump to give something to the Cuban lobby in Congress in order to be able to push his own agenda as the BBB, the big beautiful bill and whatnot, whatever he needs. And then there's a fourth layer, which is Marco Rubio's personal commitments here. And I, for one, it's one that believes that there's some kind of deadline here. I mean, this is more an intuitive comment, but I do think that because we know, and at least our Minister of Interior told us, which always is very well informed, that the Venezuelan opposition that doesn't play a role as significant as the previous administration has a deadline for September. And I think that be it true or not, I do think there's this kind of pressure going on.
Okay, so this deadline in September that you're talking about is a deadline for
regime change.
Right. A regime change in Venezuela.
Yes.
What about the
basic?
What about the 4.5 million militia members that have been mobilized and drones not allowed to be flown? Is this a genuine operation, or is this symbolic?
Well, as symbolic and as genuine as a call for national mobilization can mean, to go both ways, And I think that depends on what the U.S. does. The task force they sent, the Iwo Jima amphibious task force, rapid response, or something like that it's called. Like Carl said, it's not enough, but it brings home the point of power projection. And I do think that one of the calculations here, which is the usual flow, if you ask me, is like if they bring all these Marines and ships to our shores, that would trigger some sort of panic mode inside the government, inside society, or something that's going to put some more pressure and could become a drive to go further with this agenda, which, of course, if you take that as a measure, it's not happening. It's not happening at all at this moment. I mean, to be even frank, I mean, it's more visible, the mobilization, people signing in for the militias, than anything that you can feel that as like, the gut feeling that something big is going to happen is something that you don't feel, at least in Caracas right now.
Right.
Also, I might add to Finn's point, which is, I think it's important, it's the last week and the week previous to that, many terrorist plots were foiled. And this could bring the dimension of two simultaneous plays going on.
Okay, can you give us a little bit more details about the terrorist plots? What was exactly foiled?
Yes, since July the 29th of last year, after the presidential elections, it has been a current theme and thing both throughout the year that a major plot, basically, terrorist plot, has been foiled, and it involves the same three kind of actors here. First, you have the political clout focused on Maria Corina Machado. Usually what she says, it's in tandem with what she tries to foretell is coming. Then you have a network of that tracks back to Ecuador, which is now the current narco state in Latin America, in alliance with Balkan and Albanese mafias that basically give the logistics. And then you have deserted from the army and also national Venezuelan criminal networks that usually do the bid. This has, at least 8 or 9 public interventions have been made, and they talk about over 20 of these terrorist attempts. For the last one was actually part of it was they were going to put 3 kilos of TNT at a new public square in a very bustling area of Caracas called Plaza Venezuela.
Wow.
In which there's this, it's pretty messed up. There's this square, square that's called Victory Square. It was made in homage for the marches of the Soviet marches in World War II. It has a flame, of this content flame burning as a symbol of the sacrifice. That has a gas can or something underneath it. So on a regular basis, you have hundreds of thousands of people walking by there, and add up 3 kilos of TNT with gas near many important buildings around the area. And I'm not talking about trade and also critical transportation nodes.
Right.
That would supposedly cause chaos, which guess that in a timely fashion that would relate with the task force that's now reaching the shores. That's a dangerous part. That's
It's
the actual
dangerous
part.
indeed. Carl, I want to move over to you. In Trump's first presidency, he recognized the opposition, the then opposition figure, Juan Guaido, as a president or as the president of Venezuela, as opposed to the democratically elected president, Nicolas Maduro. That didn't work then. Is it going to work this time with this, pretext of drug trafficking?
Well, U.S. has been targeting Venezuela even before Trump. I mean, they have, for decades, U.S. have been trying to subvert the Bolivarian revolution and trying to cause regime change in Venezuela. They have not succeeded. They will not succeed this time. U.S. have carried out multiple coup attempt against the Venezuelan government. And we're just seeing the latest iteration. This is because fundamentally, it's because Venezuela is trying to chart its own independent course of national policy and foreign policy. That's something that United States cannot stand, especially in what it considers its own backyard in Latin America. U.S. has no partners, has no allies. U.S. has only vassals, and you want to turn every countries in the Western Hemisphere as U.S. vassals. That's why it has been trying to snuff out Cuba, Venezuela for decades. This is just more of the same. It's not going to succeed. I think Diego is right. This is probably Trump administration's attempt to intimidate. This is what Trump do. Trump is a bully. He will, if you read his Art of Deal, he will bluff. But 4,000 service members, that's not enough. That will barely make a dent.
Right.
I think Venezuela will be fine.
Diego, what do you think? Carl is saying this is they've tried this before, they failed before, they're going to fail again. Is it a matter of just keep trying until they succeed?
I think it's worse than that. I think the main issue here is the lack of capacity of innovate means of approach. And I'm not talking about politics, diplomacy, or whatever. I'm talking about precisely this kind of disruptive attempts. And I mean, he's completely right about that. I mean, I don't think this is going to be significant. And mind you, he did this exact same thing back in 2020. Exactly like this. They brought a task force, a fleet near our shores. They did the same thing to the Philippines back then. The headline would be something like the U.S. sends, in order to fight the drug dealers, they send ships to the Pacific Southeast. What a surprise. And Venezuela. So not even in that sense, it's innovative. Mind you, brother, that one of the reasons this also happened back in the day, and I'm talking now about 2019, you can see it in Mark Espert's, a former Secretary of Defense, memoirs. He talks about a meeting that happened right after the failed coup of April the 30th, 2019, what we call the Plantel coup here, because they just basically took a road, and the most significant picture was a box full of plantel bananas. So it's a banana coup. and it was treated more like a public order thing more than a coup, a military coup or something. The thing is that right after that meeting, a meeting where it was Mark Esper, I think it was Bolton still at the National Security Council back then, William Barr and Trump. Barr proposed to let's stop with the bring democracy crap and start playing with politics. And we know what we already have to accept that this failed. So let's do a paradigm shift. This is not more a matter of democracy. This is a matter of security. This is a criminal network. This is a cartel, like they're calling it right now, with a flimsy cartel de los soles, which translates into the Sun cartel, trying to link it to the generals of the military here. And that's why they did it. So it's basically the same thing going on right now. So that proves Carl's point, I think, completely.
Rinse and recycle. Just keep going with the same thing over and over again. Okay, Carl, what about the Iranian assistance that is being provided to Venezuela right now with military assistance, UAV, short-range guided missiles, things like that, that is improving Venezuela's sort of defense systems? And at the same time, we know that Venezuela has some significant oil reserves. Is this going to be strengthening the deterrence that Caracas has with regards to the U.S. or not?
Well, of course, Venezuela is always happy to receive assistance from fellow members of the global South, and then Iran do have a lot of expertise in terms of drone technology. You know, it's the Iranian drones that also help Russia in the battlefield against Ukraine. Now, the you mentioned that Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserve. I mean, that's a precise reason the United States is involved. U.S. has, they have a nose for oil. Wherever there's oil, you will find U.S. trying to bring democracy. And right now, what they're doing with Venezuela is like a monkey throwing fishes against a wall to see what sticks. So far nothing has stick. They're just trying everything right now. And another motivation that's driving the Trump administration is they are fearing that countries like China or Iran or Russia are making inroad into Latin America, which again, United States consider as its own backyard. And this is, China is looking to plow more investment into the Venezuelan oil exploration, for example, and that's a no-no for U.S. For U.S. that's a right reserve for U.S. oil companies. And I think the cooperation with China, Iran, that's ridiculous. They can't have that. But again, nothing that U.S. has done so far has worked. They will keep on try again. But I don't see the result will turn out any differently this time.
Okay, Diego, I'm assuming you were nodding there a little bit. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, this is quite easy to agree with. Yeah, and he's right. I would add something to this, which I think it's, I think it brings another layer to this, which is, all these years, especially since the maximum pressure campaign back in 2019, 2020, there's this major cognitive dissonance between actual energy market interests and politics on the other side, ideological politics on the other side. This has been a big problem. I remember precisely Marco Rubio, as a senator, promoting this same agenda back then, complaining about Valero sources or something, which is a main buyer of Venezuelan heavy crude, saying that this is going to stop because they're supporting the regime, they're funding the criminal network, and et cetera, et cetera. Something that's going on right now. Again, you can see also the whole thing going on with Chevron, where they're giving the license and they take it away. I mean, we're not the sanctions here. Chevron is the one that's being sanctioned, to be more accurate. But in any case, there's a major contradiction between these two forces. Even again, there was this famous op-ed written in the Wall Street Journal. A guy was interviewing energy market players, U.S. energy market players, about the back then, the future elections. And basically what they said was, we prefer a known Nicolás Maduro, regardless we like him or not, instead of someone new like Maria Corina Machado in this case, that's going to disrupt even further the market. It's going to bring more instability. And when we need stability, we need a stable market, because sanctions and the 40% of sanction all throughout the world, of course, doesn't guarantee any proper development of the energy markets for them, for these corporations. We're not talking about us, of course, which obviously, or Iran for that matter, and obviously are also interested in selling like a normal player at the energy market, you know? So I think this is also a way to force it up, to rough it up, and to overcome this contradiction in that way. Because it's not only trade and sanctions and geopolitics and how Venezuela being undermined, that would undermine China or Iran or the US. There's another reason here. There's a major refining circuit in southern US from Mississippi up to Illinois that basically depends on Venezuelan heavy crude. It can't be substituted by Alberta tar sands or anything. Only Venezuelan heavy crude, because it's a historical circuit. Ran basically by Valero and Chevron, and well, in Citgo, that basically had been taken away from us, which was a gas provider, gas station company that operated in the U.S. and which has been taken away within the financial maelstrom. But that's another story, anyways. But the thing is that you also have that need of feeding this circuit that only can be fed with this Venezuelan heavy crude.
Right. Carl, between 2020 and 2023, the Chinese investment in Latin America apparently totaled something around about the $48 billion, although Venezuela didn't get much of it. Is that a change in China's attitude or policy towards Venezuela, or is the China-Venezuela relationship or alliance, still a deterrence to America?
Well, the original Monroe Doctrine stated that the U.S. would not tolerate any other foreign powers interference in Latin America. I mean, at that time, it was specifically aimed toward European powers, particularly British. Now, China is a near-peer competitor of the United States, and the Trump administration and the U.S. elite in general are very sensitive about China supplanting United States as the world's largest economy. It's going to threaten U.S. global hegemony, and particularly hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. And another thing about the oil is that domestically, Trump has gone all in on big oil. I mean, Trump's one of the biggest backer of Trump is a big oil in United States, and this has also led to his very public breakup with Elon Musk, by the way, because Trump wants to get rid of all the subsidies for clean energy and for electrification and for transition to EV, because he wants to go all in on oil. And as Diargo mentioned, a lot of the refineries in United States are set up to refine heavy crude that's produced by Venezuela, and so the United States have a very strong interest, or I should say, the oil companies have a very strong interest to take control of the Venezuelan oil, like they used to. They used to have a large share of the Venezuelan oil resources, and they're not happy now. They see another player like China is coming in.
But why wouldn't China invest in Venezuela over the years 2020 to 2023? It sounds like it should have invested.
Well, China is investing in Venezuela, and what the United States fear is that China will increase its investment into Venezuela, particularly in the oil sector. There's actually a CNN report from 2 days ago. You reported a private Chinese company is looking to invest another $1 billion into oil exploration in Venezuela. This is what alarms the Trump administration.
Okay, so they wouldn't be happy about that. Obviously, that's That's good. Diego, do you have any comments about the Chinese investment?
Yes, and also to address your question and why did China didn't properly invest enough during those years. I mean, I think I have to go full disclosure here. We're very good at fighting. We're very good at working in short-term periods, but we suck at planning and we suck at economy. And those were the worst years ever. And also, the other thing, which is not a positive one, but it's a real one, we have a huge debt with China. So in that sense, many
when you say worst years ever, between 2020 to 2023 for Venezuela, is that economically?
Yeah, I mean economically, especially. Right. I mean, you can even bring it before, like 2016, 17.
Right. Okay.
So much until 2022. I mean, these were the worst years in a very, very long time, I think. And coming from the best years also before this, before sanctions, of course. And so I think it's normal, even for China, especially for China, to be cautious about what to do in a very unstable moment with very risk going on. China's not that crazy to do that kind of risk taking, and also to bring things into order. And I think those years actually relate to this, and it has retaken, as Carlos already described, a better pace now, a rhythm that was basically not suspended because it has never halted, it never reached a complete halt. But yeah, it reduced its participation during those years, and I basically think it has to do with that. Now that things are more clear, now that things are better organized here, regardless of the issues that we got, I think that, as Carl already said, there's a different rhythm going on. China was really outspoken and recently regarding precisely the threats of the U.S. right now. I mean, just a couple of days ago or 3 days ago or something. So, and there are other reasons. Not only oil, we have also the fourth gold reserve in the world. We have gas. We're the first one in Latin America and the fourth in the world. We have also several strategic minerals. We also have the longest coastline in the Caribbean basin, and politically, we are at the same page. That's even more important than some things. China's already the biggest partner of Venezuela, Brazil. I don't know Mexico, and they don't think so, but I mean, it's the biggest economic part of most of Latin America, except for even Argentina right now with Milei there. I think China's the first, or near to be the first partner of Argentina. So that's a hard truth for the U.S., and it also proves. Even with a bad moment we're going here, that China, it's here to stay, at least for a very long time, I think.
Right. And speaking of being politically on the same page, Iran, China, Venezuela having formed that alliance, assuming it's going to stay the same over the next 5 years, that's surely going to create some sort of durable multipolar world as we are seeing the world moving towards. Or is it going to cause a cycle of escalation? Carl, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think U.S. would never give up its aim to destabilize Latin American countries that try to pilot an independent policy. That does not bend the knee. I mean, Trump right now, he wants the whole world to come to Washington to bend the knee and kiss the ring, just like all the European leaders were doing. And they have it out for Venezuela because Venezuela, countries like Venezuela, like Cuba, they buck the trend, and this is why U.S. want to make an example out of them. It does not want more countries to defy the United States, particularly in its own neighborhood in the West Hemisphere. This is the same thing that U.S. have done for decades, if not for centuries, in West Hemisphere. I mean, it's really nothing new under the sun. What has changed, though? Now we do see the global South countries are now coming together, trying to form an alternative to a U.S.-led global order. This is why Trump have publicly labeled BRICS as an anti-Western, anti-American alliance, when all BRICS are trying to do is just to form an economic cooperation among global South countries. So I think what U.S. is increasingly concerned that is as the global South continue to grow, that United States not only it's going to get freezed out of this new world new world alliance, and this is why they're lashing back right now.
Right, Diego. Carl says that Trump wants everyone to kiss the ring, and that with regards back to the question initially, is this going to form a durable multipolar world or a cycle of escalation?
I've been writing about this since Trump came back to office. We are now actually domestic policy more than foreign policy. I mean, Latin America in general. I mean, we're part of the reshoring and repatriation of capital and industry. So if you don't like the fiscal offers that the U.S. have on their grounds, we have all this land that you can lease and use for this. So, and also that's why also another way they enforce the security issue above the political ones. And yes, I mean, completely. I would have joked that, yeah, we are the background, but what's going on in Europe, man, I'm not sure. It's a background with a big pool. If we compare it to Latin America right now, what's going on in Europe. But the sad thing is, one of the historical north, the historical compass of Latin America has been unity ever since independence. Like Pan-Africanism, like Pan-Asianism, 100 years before. So Latin America has also been balkanized in so many ways, de facto, de jure, politically, whatever, And currently, right now, we're in a bad place, I think, regarding that guiding, that main important Bolivarian guiding line. I think that's very important here to address. So they feel if the country, here's my cat, by the way, with a tail. So if they need to enforce the divisions within the continent in order to enforce the grip on the region. And yes, they're going to take it all the way to the kiss, to kiss the ring. And there are many governance here, and many presidents are more than willful and more than happy to kiss the ring. That's a tragedy of this. And of course, you have countries that won't kiss the ring, and I think this has been shown: Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico. Mexico has also shown a lot of spine. Then you got countries like Brazil that I don't know why they're doing all this liberal, sorry for the word, but this liberal bullshit kind of thing, this pointless balancing act between BRICS and G20. I mean, they undermined our accession into BRICS last year, and it was a Bolsonaro foreign policy official that they allowed him to do this. And this is Lula, man. This is no one else. You can't blame anyone else. And then you have the other extreme. You have Argentina with Milei now, which is a nutcase, and it's going to be the biggest Israeli protectorate in the whole world. Then you have Paraguay, that even now doesn't recognize China. They recognize Taiwan instead of China.
Wow, okay. They don't recognize China.
They don't. I mean, they even have a square with a Chiang Kai-shek statue. I mean, Stroessner was like the paladin of anti-communism, and then they actually remained that way. Mind you, Honduras also didn't recognize China until recently.
Right.
It's crazy. You see all these lines clashing and overlapping in this situation, and they try to make the best of the situation. And there are ways and inroads they'll be able to do it, but not in Venezuela, not in Nicaragua, not in Cuba, not in Mexico. So that's the thing. What you have, and regarding the multipolarity thing, which is also an important decision that already Venezuela and Honduras and formerly Bolivia, by the way, sadly not anymore, made. The only response for this, and I'm quoting a Pepe article that he wrote 2 years ago, the only response to multipolarity actually is genocide. The only thing that could, quote unquote, maybe stop energy and paradigm shift throughout the world. It's basically genocidal means and intent and exterminate. Just like they're doing it in Gaza, it's going to be the canary in the coal mine. If they're able to do it somewhere else, they will. That's the Gaza method. If we think about what Tariq Sidi Lamar wrote also a couple of years ago.
Wow, that could escalate very quickly, then, couldn't it?
Yes. At the same time, it could happen. You know, that's the
nothing is impossible. Yeah. Look, I was reading about Diego. This one's for you, I guess, because of your location. But I was reading about an Iranian supermarket called Megasis. Is that how you pronounce it? Yep.
Yes.
So Megasis is an Iranian supermarket that was opened, I don't know, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago in 2020, is what I read, alongside with the refinery rehabilitation that Iran is, doing with Caracas. Is this, first of all, what is Megasis, if you can tell us more about that? And then, is this more cooperation between Caracas and Tehran, or is this just a political show?
No, man. I mean, it's funny talking about risk taking. Megasis opened shop here precisely during those really bad years here in Caracas.
Yes, in 2020, right in the middle of what you mentioned. Yes, exactly.
Precisely, and actually, I must say, I mean, Iran had a stellar role during those years for us. I actually remember, I warm-heartedly remember them because, I mean, they were pretty vocal about their support in the worst moment for Venezuela. This has happened before the other way around. I mean, I like that very much, how that intense part of the relation has been going on. No, I mean, we have a strategic partnership with Iran. And Megasis, it's a very important part. Sadly, it's not too close to my home, but I went there several times, not only because there were cheap stuff from Venezuelan goods, but a lot of Iranian goodies also. I mean, the best place to buy dates, it's Megasis, you know? And it's more like a convenience store because you have all the supermarket and grocery stuff, but they also sell clothing and electrical power plants, hardware appliances. It's not only groceries. So, and I think it was a very bold move.
So it's not just a supermarket; it's a super store. Really, it's a department store. It's got everything in it.
And they also have exhibitions.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, they showed a medical machinery, convenience, and medical supplies, and also agriculture goods. I mean, small ones. I'm not talking about tractors or anything else, but shovels and rakes and whatever.
So it's made a real change and improvement to the lives of the population in Venezuela. It's not just a show.
I think locally, yeah, it's not a show. It's not a show. It's actually very well placed. It's right in front of Petare. Petare is the most densely populated slum in all Latin America. Not the biggest, but the most dense one. So they knew where to go, And yes, I remember every time I went there, I've seen many working class Caracas families going there and buying stuff. You can also buy, by the way, carpets and cell phones. And
Iranian carpets.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you might not say it's like a huge impact, but I think locally it's significant. They should open more in order to, to have that level of impact. Because the problem is, I think there's only one, which is this one. So I think it needs to expand to other Venezuelan cities in order to, to make it even more successful and also to be known.
Very good. Final question for the guests today, and we'll start with Carl. We've got the global power moving from the west to the east, but with this power shift, which confrontation is closer, do you think, in terms of time-wise? Iran versus the US and Israel, or Venezuela versus the US? What are your thoughts, Carl?
Okay, so this is a tough one because right now there's a tug of war. Israel very much would like to involve United States in another Middle Eastern war against Iran, because Israel knows by itself it lacks the capability to confront Iran. Iran is too big, too powerful for Israel to handle. So Israel wants United States to be involved. But U.S., especially the Donald Trump administration, Donald Trump, he will go for easy victories. He would love nothing more to go in and claim an easy victory. But he also realizes that a war against Iran would be nothing like an easy victory. This is why that he did the intentional glancing blow against the Iranian nuclear facility and claim victory. And that's what. So right now, the reason I think they want to focus on Latin America is, like Diago said, they try to pick a soft target that's in their neighborhood, that they see that U.S. has a greater power projection. But again, the nature of Trump administration is that the Trump is a very transactional type of person. He doesn't want to be bogged down in a long drag out conflict. I mean, he just want to do something that can yield the maximum PR for himself. He also want to be seen as a peacemaker. Let's remember, he's petitioning for winning the Nobel Peace Prize right now. So I think that will temper any possible military intervention against Venezuela in the immediate future.
All right. So neither, is that what you say?
That's my guess.
All right. Diego, what are your thoughts?
One more time, I agree with Carl. I mean, Venezuela, mind you, the U.S., sorry, the Trump administration has a two-track approach to Venezuela. He has good cop Rick Grenell and bad cop Marco Rubio. And you haven't seen Trump saying anything recently about Venezuela. It's all Rubio or Carlos Jimenez, Maria Elvira Salazar, Díaz Balart, whatever. It's not Trump saying it. He's allowing, he's gambling here in a way. He's allowing Rubio to go further. And if it has any chance of success, he's gonna capitalize on that. If it's a blunder, if it doesn't work, which I think it won't, but can't predict. If it doesn't work, it's a Marco Rubio flaw, and maybe it could get even worse for Rubio. Inshallah, it happens that way. By the way, but I also think they're interrelated in the sense that maybe precisely because they don't succeed in Venezuela, that could also provoke another attempt from Israel in Iran. I think that's a possibility there too. But the transactional nature, just like Carl said, I think it's very, very important here. So if there is, yes, an easy win, be it Venezuela, be it Iran, which they're doing, they're exploiting it the same way, by the way. Infiltrations, try to make the best of our own current weakness or problems like you have with the water and electricity. We had the same problem here a couple of years ago. Inflation, whatever. It's pretty similar in that sense, structurally speaking. But I think boils down to that. Wherever he's going to see an actual easy win, he's going to go for it. And probably the best forecast is what Carl is saying right now.
Is that neither will actually take place?
Yeah, I even hedge the bet more for Iran than for Venezuela in my case. I don't want any of those two to happen actually.
But if you were to choose one, if you had to choose one, you would say, you would bet, not that we gamble, but you would bet that Iran would be. Okay, very good.
Not happy to say it, but I might speculate it's more possible because you have the Israel factor there, and you have the Gaza occupation, which won't work either.
Yeah,
that's the problem there.
And Israel is pushing for it, like you said, so that it's being felt. So thank you to the guests.
Hello, welcome to this episode of Ritter's Rant. Today we're going to be talking about foreign terrorist organizations. In particular, the use of the Trump administration's designation of certain groups as foreign terrorist organizations and what this means in the broader context of Donald Trump's aggressive posturing off the coast of Venezuela. As people probably have seen, a speedboat, a motorboat, ostensibly carrying 11 so-called terrorists, and again, alleged to be carrying narcotics, was tracked and destroyed by forces of the United States military, killing all 11 personnel on the boat and I guess destroying their narcotics cargo. According to the Trump administration, to the State Department, this boat and the people inside were affiliated with the Tren de Aragua terrorist group. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but it doesn't matter. This is a terrorist group that has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the Trump administration. It's an organization that operates on the soil of Venezuela. The Trump administration claims that it operates the direction of the Maduro government. I don't think anybody else agrees with that. Most expert opinion holds that this organization operates on territory that's outside of the control of the Venezuelan government and operates independent of the Venezuelan government. But be that as may, it's a Venezuelan-based foreign terrorist organization, has been designated as such. The question here has nothing to do with, is it justifiable for the United States to, try and prevent this organization from smuggling drugs into America? Of course, that's our job. It's our duty, our responsibility to secure our borders and to keep, criminals like this out, to keep drugs out of our borders. But a lot of people are like high-fiving, saying this is awesome. This is what designation of FTO. We put some, substance behind the words without really reflecting on that. Go and read the statute. Read the statute very carefully. The designation of any group as a foreign terrorist organization does not give the United States military an inherent right to hunt them down and kill them. What the statute talks about is the ability to sanction them and to prevent other people from doing business with them. It can hold up additional law enforcement, measures, accountability, etc. But it's not a, it's not a death warrant. It's anything but a death warrant. And so now you have to ask yourself, what the hell was the U.S. military doing tracking a civilian vessel in international waters and assassinating the 11 people inside? There's no legal authority whatsoever. Congress certainly hasn't given them the legal authority to do this. We're not at war. Being designated as an FTO is not a declaration of war. This is a war crime. And I think Americans need to be careful about cheering this sort of thing. Let's just also look at it from the standpoint of law enforcement. We got 11 guys on a boat full of narcotics. They left Venezuela and they're heading to points unknown, but I think the Trump administration claims they had irrefutable evidence that they were bringing these narcotics to American waters. Okay. Gee, wouldn't you want to arrest these guys? Bring them into custody, talk to them, interrogate them, find out what they knew, maybe open up a case, find out who dispatched them, get more information about the structure of the organization. It's called intelligence work, law enforcement work. This is what should have been done. If you need to track the boat, you fire warning shots. You can disable the boat, then you board it using the Coast Guard. But the last thing you do is use the United States military to murder these people on open waters, because this is what it was, murder. There was no authorization. They didn't present a threat, an imminent risk to any U.S. military personnel. I don't even think they knew they were being tracked. They were just out there having a good time on the high seas, and boom, they're dead. That's murder. That's a war crime. And that's something no American should want the men and women in our armed forces to ever be accused of. This is very dangerous things that are being done by the Trump administration. First of all, did they present this evidence to a judge? I mean, did they get permission to kill these people? Did the president sign a finding authorizing the military to kill these people? Under what legal authority would this authorization be made? This is bad stuff. This is bad stuff. This is about murder. Do we know who the 11 people were? Could there have been an American citizen on board? Did we just murder an American? We don't know. We don't know. Do we have the authority to murder America? I know Barack Obama did it on a regular basis. No due process. But gosh, President Trump claims to be a different president, a better president, a president who claims that the Constitution matters, but doesn't. There was no due process offered these people. They were simply murdered. They weren't given a chance to surrender. They weren't even given a chance to resist. Had they resisted, then they could be taken out. But only, with proportional force. Here, the boat was just hit, killing all 11 people. This isn't how America operates, guys. We need to do better than this. This is how drug cartels operate. They murder people.
Yeah, the U.S.
This is how criminal organizations operate. This is how foreign terrorist organizations operate, but not the United States.
The United States is a criminal.
Defend America in the war on drugs? Absolutely. Stop the boat, detain the suspects, seize the cargo, and then begin a law enforcement investigation that leads you to the foundational elements of this criminal enterprise so that you can begin to take it apart.
Lead you to
all you did here was a sound and light show, designed to please an audience. I mean, what have the American people become? A crowd in the Coliseum where gladiator type events take place so that we can cheer and clap in bloodlust? That's not who we are. We need to do better, and we need to insist that our government does better. Stop drugs? Yes. Assassinate people in open waters? No. We need to protect the men and women who wear the uniform of the armed services of the United States of America from any allegation of wrongdoing. And here, there's an open and shut case that Americans committed war crimes on the high seas. That's my rant. Next time the thought crosses my mind, I'll be sure to share it with you. Thank you.
And based on double standards. However, when you look at what the United States does in Latin America, the level of dishonesty and deception is truly breathtaking. Today, I'm going to be showing how the Donald Trump administration is supporting one of the most corrupt politicians on earth, a Colombian oligarch who is very closely linked to drug cartels and paramilitary groups. This has been admitted by US intelligence agencies. It's not controversial to say that. And yet the Trump administration is staunchly defending him, while at the same time, the US government is starting another coup attempt in Venezuela, trying to overthrow Venezuela's left-wing president, Nicolas Maduro, based on accusations without any proof that Maduro is supposedly linked to drug cartels. Well, again, the U.S. government is actively defending someone that the U.S. government knows works directly with drug cartels in Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia. But of course, the difference is that Maduro is a left-wing leader who is closely allied with China and Russia, and he opposes U.S. imperialism and meddling in Latin America. Whereas in neighboring Colombia, the U.S. government is supporting a corrupt right-wing multimillionaire oligarch who is a longtime U.S. ally. despite the fact that he's been working with drug cartels for decades. So who is this exactly? Today I'll be talking about Álvaro Uribe, who is the former president of Colombia, and he's a staunch right-wing US ally, and he's especially close to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And this July, Colombia saw a political earthquake after a court found Uribe guilty of bribery, one of his many crimes. This case against Uribe, who is the most powerful politician in the entire country, has been called Colombia's trial of the century. In response to this decision made by a Colombian court, the US government is directly meddling in Colombia's internal affairs and trying to save one of its longtime allies, Uribe, again, who's very closely linked to drug cartels and paramilitary groups. Marco Rubio, who's the most powerful person in the US government after Donald Trump. Rubio is simultaneously serving as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. And in response to this ruling by a Colombian court, Rubio took to Twitter and he condemned Colombia's justice system. And he said, quote, "Former Colombian President Uribe's only crime has been to tirelessly fight and defend his homeland. The weaponization of Colombia's judicial branch by radical judges has now set a worrisome precedent," end quote. Now, first of all, why is the US government getting involved in a domestic case? This doesn't involve anyone from the US. Imagine if Colombia's foreign minister took to Twitter and condemned the radical judges in the US judicial system and the weaponization of the US judicial system. This is blatant meddling. But the hypocrisy is even more stunning when you realize that the US government has known for decades that Álvaro Uribe works closely with the most notorious drug cartels on earth. This was admitted way back in 1991 by one of the leading US intelligence agencies, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. It admitted that Uribe, quote, worked for the Medellin cartel, end quote, and was a, quote, close personal friend of Pablo Escobar, end quote. Now, Pablo Escobar is the most famous drug dealer in the history of the world. Netflix even made a famous TV show about him called Narcos, which was very popular in the US. And inside Colombia, one of Pablo Escobar's close political allies was this right-wing former president, Álvaro Uribe, who also happens to be one of the closest US allies. Although I should also point out that this notorious drug dealer's son, Juan Pablo Escobar, wrote a book in which he detailed how his father had worked for the CIA. This is a well-established fact. The most famous drug dealer in history worked closely with the CIA and US spy agencies.
What's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
But honestly, that's just scratching the surface of the evidence linking this close US ally to drug cartels and paramilitary groups. The Associated Press, the most mainstream of all mainstream media outlets, reported in 2018, citing declassified US State Department cables, that Álvaro Uribe, Colombia's most powerful politician, was closely tied to Colombian drug cartels. This article noted that back in the 1990s, the US Embassy was informed of the fact that Uribe is a cousin of the notorious Colombian crime family, the Ochoas, and that they were using drug money in order to fund his political campaigns. He was the governor of his state, then he was senator, and then he became president of the country. I mean, there are mountains of evidence linking Uribe to drug cartels. Another example came in 2013 when a close family member of Uribe pled guilty to drug trafficking. The former girlfriend of Uribe's brother, Jaime, who is the mother of two of Uribe's nieces, her name is Dolly Cifuentes Villa, she pled guilty in the United States, and her criminal organization was accused of trafficking 30 tons of cocaine into the US on behalf of Mexico's notorious Sinaloa cartel. and overseeing money laundering operations with the cartel leader El Chapo Guzman, probably the second most famous drug dealer on earth after Pablo Escobar. But that's not all. The corruption and crimes go even deeper, because in addition to being closely linked to drug cartels, Alvaro Uribe has also been very closely linked to paramilitary groups, or that's a euphemism, really death squads. This has also been known since the 1990s. The Associated Press, the most mainstream US media outlet, reported in 2011 that a jailed Colombian paramilitary chief accused Uribe of sponsoring his illegal armed group. In a video testimony, he said that he organized a militia that operated from the ranch that was owned by Uribe's family in the northwestern Colombian state of Antioquia back in 1996, when Uribe was governor of that Colombian state. And then he became senator, and then he became president. That is by no means the only evidence showing that. In 2018, the National Security Archive, based at George Washington University in the US, interviewed multiple people who worked at the ranch owned by the Uribe family, and they said the exact same thing. They reported that a ranch owned by Uribe and other members of his family was the operational base of a deadly paramilitary group, according to 3 former employees who said the Uribe family, and especially the former president's brother, Santiago Uribe, had a close and friendly relationship with the leader of 12 Apóstoles, which is Spanish for the 12 apostles, which was a death squad. I mean, again, paramilitary group is a euphemism. This was a straight up death squad that assassinated people that right-wing oligarchs in Colombia didn't like. Activists, left-wing politicians, indigenous land defenders, anyone who got in the way of their business interests, of big agricultural corporations, of the drug cartels, they would just execute these people on behalf of the right-wing oligarchs who dominate Colombian politics, in close alliance with the US government, by the way. Now, even the New York Times reported on this case back in 2018. It referred to the Uribe family ranch as a death ranch, and it noted that many people in Colombia feared there would be no prosecution because everyone knew that Uribe was extremely corrupt, but he was so powerful that there were never any consequences. And I really have to emphasize that the crimes committed by Uribe with the support of the US government are truly bone-chilling. In 2023, the Colombian military was forced to formally apologize because now, for the first time ever, Colombia has a left-wing president, Gustavo Petro, and he wanted justice for the victims of the Colombian military and these paramilitary groups backed by right-wing politicians like Uribe. Why do they apologize? What happened? This is known as the false positive scandal in Colombia, falsos positivos. And in this scandal, the Colombian army executed thousands of innocent civilians and then dressed them up in the uniform of left-wing guerrillas from the FARC, which is a revolutionary socialist group that for decades had been fighting against the Colombian government. So in the years that Alvaro Uribe was president, from 2002 until 2008, the Colombian army killed 6,402 civilians and then dressed them up in uniforms, falsely claiming they were left-wing guerrillas in order to boost their kill rate. Under Uribe, the Colombian regime literally massacred thousands of innocent civilians and then blamed the left. This is how brutal and sadistic the right-wing oligarchs are in Colombia. They are straight up criminals and murderers. These are the kind of horrific crimes that were constantly being committed by the Colombian regime when Alvaro Uribe was president from 2002 to 2010. And again, he was a very close ally of the US government. And in particular, he was very close to US President George W. Bush. And the biggest irony of all is that the US government praised Uribe as its loyal ally in the so-called war on drugs. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. One of the most notorious drug cartel-linked corrupt politicians on earth was portrayed by Washington as the poster boy of the war on drugs. Like I said earlier, the hypocrisy is absolutely jaw-dropping. You cannot overstate the extreme hypocrisy. And throughout this time period of the so-called war on drugs, the US government was giving billions of dollars of so-called aid to the Colombian regime. A lot of that was military aid from the US military industrial complex. So US corporations were profiting, military contractors, and sending weapons and military equipment to the Colombian army as Colombian soldiers were killing innocent people and then dressing them up as left-wing guerrillas and claiming that they were so-called terrorists. These crimes in the false positive scandal were made possible by the massive military aid from the US government in the so-called Plan Colombia. The US government's fingerprints were all over these horrific crimes. And that's why it's not surprising at all to see that today the Trump administration is once again strongly defending this known drug cartel-linked, death squad-linked former president, Álvaro Uribe, and meddling in Colombia's internal affairs. Because this is also closely linked to Colombia's internal politics and the fact that in 2026, there's a presidential election coming up in Colombia, and the US government is meddling in Colombian affairs to try to prevent the current left-wing president, Gustavo Petro, from staying in power. Again, this is the first ever left-wing president in the history of the country. In the past, there had been left-wing presidential candidates who were popular, and they were assassinated by drug cartels and criminal groups. So the fact that Petro was able to come to power was truly historic. And immediately after he won the election, the US government has been meddling in Colombia's internal affairs to try to destabilize Petro and prevent him from governing. In fact, this June 2025, journalists exposed a coup attempt against Petro by his corrupt former foreign minister, who was replaced by Petro, and since then he's been waging a political war against the president. His name is Álvaro Leyva, and in leaked recordings obtained by journalists, he admitted that he was trying to get support from the US government, including Marco Rubio, in order to carry out a coup to overthrow the left-wing president, Petro. And from the beginning of Petro's term, Marco Rubio has been constantly attacking the left-wing Colombian president, including back when Marco Rubio was just a senator, and especially now that Rubio is US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. He's been constantly criticizing Petro, especially because Petro has been very outspoken in defense of the Palestinian people, which has really angered the United States. So another reason that Marco Rubio is blatantly interfering in Colombia's internal politics is he's trying to tip the scales in support of the Colombian right wing, because Uribe is basically the king of the right wing in Colombia, and any right wing politician who wants to be the candidate to be president in the elections has to get the approval from Uribe and his allies. Now, Colombia is probably the most blatant example of the hypocrisy and double standards and corruption and criminality of US foreign policy in Latin America. But there are many, many other examples. I mean, first of all, this is a region where the US has militarily intervened in almost every single country. The US government has backed dozens of military coups against democratically elected left-wing leaders in the region. And many of these right-wing authoritarian regimes that have been backed by the US, they've essentially been US puppet regimes, and they have often been very closely linked to drug cartels, and they have used drug trafficking to fund their operations. Another great example of this is the former right-wing dictator who governed Honduras with the support of the US government. His name is Juan Orlando Hernández, and he's also known popularly as Ho, based on his initials, J-O-H. And he oversaw one of the largest drug trafficking operations in the entire world, while being staunchly supported by the US government. Juan Orlando Hernández was an especially close ally of Donald Trump during his first term as president from 2017 until 2021. In 2019, the Trump administration invited this notorious drug trafficking dictator to participate in a special event that the US held at the United Nations, calling for protecting religious freedom. And of course, the US government used this event to attack China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and all of Washington's geopolitical adversaries, while inviting as special guests right-wing drug trafficking dictators. Juan Orlando Hernandez praised Trump as one of his close friends and allies. Now, the reason that Hernandez even came to power in the first place is because the US government backed a coup in Honduras in 2009, overthrowing the country's democratically elected left-wing president, Manuel Zelaya. And the US government at that time was led by a Democrat, by President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, and also Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. These are the most powerful leaders of the Democratic Party, and they strongly supported this coup against an elected left-wing leader and helped put in power right-wing corrupt drug dealers to run Honduras for over a decade. So I should be clear, it wasn't just Trump who supported this notorious drug trafficking dictator in Honduras. It was also Biden and Obama. But the fact that the US government was so openly, publicly supporting a man that everyone knew was a dictator and was a drug trafficker, it obviously hurt the image, the public relations, the propaganda of the US empire. So when Biden came in as president, slowly he moved away from Juan Orlando Hernandez and he tried to rebrand US foreign policy. You know, Democrats always use rhetoric about democracy and human rights, you know, unlike Trump and the Republicans and George Bush, who are much more concerned with the blunt fist of imperialism. They don't care about all that propaganda. It's cynical propaganda. I mean, the Democrats don't really care about it either, but the Democrats tried to maintain an image, at least, of caring about the rule of law and democracy and human rights. So the Biden administration turned against Juan Orlando Hernandez after he left office, and they tried to make an example of him. I mean, there are many examples throughout history of Washington supporting a brutal, corrupt dictator and then turning against him when he no longer serves U.S. interests. Another good example of this is Saddam Hussein in Iraq. In the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran and tried to overthrow the new revolutionary government in Iran after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the CIA gave Iraq intelligence in order to facilitate Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons and gas against Iranian soldiers in the Iran-Iraq war. So the US government had been directly supporting Saddam Hussein, and then just 2 decades later, in 2003, the US invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein's government. So similarly, in the Biden administration, they were trying to rebrand imperialist US foreign policy. So they prosecuted Juan Orlando Hernandez, this former US ally who governed Honduras as a dictator with staunch US support. So I'm going to read here from the decision by the US Justice Department announcing the charges against this longtime US-backed former dictator. Quote, according to court documents from at least in or about 2004 up to and including in or about 2022, that is when he left office as president, I'm continuing, quote, Hernandez, the former 2-term president of Honduras and former president of the Honduran National Congress, was at the center of one of the largest and most violent drug trafficking conspiracies in the world. During his political career, Hernandez abused his powerful positions and authority in Honduras to facilitate the importation of over 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. Hernandez's co-conspirators were armed with machine guns and destructive devices, including AK-47s, AR-15s, and grenade launchers, which they used to protect their massive cocaine loads as they transited across Honduras on their way to the United States, to protect the money they made from the eventual sale of cocaine and guard their drug trafficking territory from rivals. Hernandez received millions of dollars of drug money from some of the largest and most violent drug trafficking organizations in Honduras, Mexico, and elsewhere, and used those bribes to fuel his rise in Honduran politics. In turn, as Hernandez rose to power in Honduras, he provided increased support and protection for his co-conspirators, allowing them to move mountains of cocaine, commit acts of violence and murder, and help turn Honduras into one of the most dangerous countries in the world. During his time in office, Hernandez publicly promoted legislation and the efforts he purported to undertake in support of anti-narcotic operations in Honduras, At the same time, he protected and enriched the drug traffickers in his inner circle and those who provided him with cocaine-fueled bribes that allowed him to obtain and stay in power in Honduras. For example, Hernandez selectively upheld extraditions by supporting and taking credit for extraditions to the United States of certain drug traffickers who threatened his grip on power, while at the same time promising drug traffickers who bribed him and followed his instructions that they would remain safe in Honduras. End quote. This criminal, who oversaw one of the largest drug trafficking operations in history, was also a close U.S. ally who is strongly supported by the U.S. government under Obama and Trump, and then even the Biden administration, until they eventually turned against their former ally after he left power. This is the perfect symbol of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America. Over decades, the U.S. government has supported dozens of corrupt right-wing dictators who have trafficked drugs and supported death squads in order to support a small handful of corrupt right-wing oligarchs who exploit the country on behalf of U.S. corporations. The U.S. did exactly the same thing in the 1980s after the leftist Sandinista front overthrew the longtime corrupt U.S.-backed right-wing dictator Somoza, and the U.S. government tried to destroy the Sandinista revolution. So in the 1980s, the CIA supported notorious far-right death squads known as the Contras, which stands for counter-revolutionaries in Spanish. And the Contras, with CIA support, not only did they assassinate Nicaraguan government officials and burn down schools and hospitals, they also trafficked drugs. And this was exposed by the U.S. journalist Gary Webb in multiple articles that he published, and then famously in his book, Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion. And Gary Webb's career was destroyed for exposing how the U.S. government supported these drug dealers to fund its terror war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And then eventually, Gary Webb died in very strange circumstances, and there's still a lot of questions about what exactly happened to him. So now that I provided all of that historical context showing how for decades the US government has backed many different corrupt right-wing dictators and drug dealers in Latin America, it should be clear how insanely hypocritical it is for the Trump administration to now absurdly accuse Venezuela's leftist president, Nicolas Maduro, of supposedly being a drug lord. And now the Trump administration is launching another coup attempt in Venezuela. So in a follow-up video, I'm going to explain how the US government is threatening military intervention in Venezuela, how the Trump administration has deployed numerous warships and more than 4,000 US troops near Venezuela, threatening the country using the excuse of so-called drug trafficking, which, as I've shown today, is completely absurd. But this is the excuse that the Trump administration is trying to use to justify U.S. intervention to overthrow Venezuela's independent leftist government. And in the follow-up video, I'll explain the other reasons why the U.S. is so obsessed with trying to destabilize Venezuela. It's not only to overthrow the revolutionary government, that's part of it, but it's also because Venezuela just so happens to have some of the largest oil reserves in the world. And of course, Venezuela is closely allied with China and Russia. It's also a close friend of Iran and other US geopolitical adversaries. I was going to talk about all of that here, but I'm trying to make my videos shorter. They're constantly too long, nearly an hour. So I'm trying to make an effort to keep them shorter, under half an hour. So I will conclude here, but in a follow-up video, I'm going to talk about the US attacks on Venezuela, which are based on this totally hypocritical claim that supposedly the Trump administration is fighting drug trafficking. I've already made it very clear today with lots and lots of evidence that the US has a long history of supporting drug traffickers in Latin America. So the attacks on Venezuela have nothing to do with drugs. That's just the excuse. But with that said, I'm going to conclude here. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe.
The West and Ukraine are still in deep shock because of the meeting of world leaders in China. Against this background, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, known for his truthful statements about the European Union, said that the celebrations in China in honor of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and the SCO summit showed the whole world that it is not Russia and China that are truly isolated, but the European Union. However, it seems that the so-called European leaders do not want to see the obvious, and continue to make provocative statements about China and Russia. For example, a few hours ago, speaking at a press conference on defense and security issues in Brussels, the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, called the meetings of the leaders of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, held in Beijing, a direct challenge to the currently dominant world order, based on the rules established by the West after World War II. According to her, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are not only taking an anti-Western stance, but also directly challenging the unipolar world and the rules-based international order. Against this backdrop, Kaja Kallas called on European countries to unite and increase military spending to a record €2 trillion by 2031. Meanwhile, Western think tanks continue to furiously discuss only the bilateral meeting between the leaders of Russia and North Korea. In general, these Western analytical centers can be understood. Indeed, the whole world drew attention to the emphatically friendly and trusting relations that Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un demonstrated during the celebrations in China. Even pro-government Western experts admitted that Putin and Kim behaved like good old friends, and talked about something for almost 3 hours during festive events in China. Most likely, many of you noticed the two leaders' body language during their meeting. All this indicated that Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un are united not only by common geopolitical interests, but also by strong, trusting, and friendly relations. That is why there is a warmth and sincerity between these two leaders, which is a rare phenomenon in international politics. Returning to the negotiations between Russia and North Korea, it's notable that Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un had an extended discussion in the Russian president's limousine, while en route to the official meeting location of the Russian and North Korean delegations. Only 30 hours later, insiders in the Kremlin admitted that Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un had discussed expanded military cooperation between the two countries. It is noteworthy that immediately after that, Russian sources began to report that Kim Jong-un offered to send a 100,000-strong army to Donbass, in order to strengthen the combat contact line in the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk regions, so that the Russian troops could begin advancing deep into Ukrainian territory, including towards the Nikolaev and Odessa regions. By the way, given the fact that all these regions have become part of the Russian Federation, the presence of the North Korean army there will not violate international law. Furthermore, reports indicate that Kim Jong-un's proposal came as a surprise to Putin, and that the Russian leader was seriously interested in deploying North Korean soldiers in the regions that became part of the Russian Federation.
I'm ready for war.
In addition, sources also confirmed rumors about hundreds of thousands of North Korean citizens who expressed a desire to voluntarily join the ranks of the Russian troops and start fighting against the Ukrainian army and NATO forces. At the moment, many Russian independent experts, analysts, and Telegram channels are furiously discussing North Korea's desire to continue fighting shoulder to shoulder with Russia against the Ukrainian Nazis and the NATO countries supporting them. By the way, the fact that North Korean soldiers can fight very well was proven in the battle for the Kursk region. My dear truth seekers, I hope that Vladimir Putin will agree to use North Korean soldiers to protect the borders of not only Donbass, but also the southern regions that have become part of the Russian Federation. Undoubtedly, this will help Russia to continue its offensive not only towards Odessa, but also towards Kiev. In return, North Korea will receive not only invaluable experience, but also Russian technologies in the field of hypersonic missiles and spacecraft. Russian channels have been vigorously discussing the proposals of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to provide military assistance to Russia in the Donbass. In particular, the North Korean leader proposed sending a 100,000 contingent of the North Korean army to Ukraine to help Russia. This proposal from North Korea was very unexpected, but at the same time very pleasant for the leadership of Russia. Why did the leader of North Korea make such a broad gesture towards Russia? Firstly, most likely, Kim Jong-un is well aware that with the redivision of the world that is currently taking place before our eyes, the West will do everything to preserve at least the remnants of the old world order. At the moment, the West is opposing Russia in Ukraine with all its might. And over time, the center of escalation will inevitably shift to the Asia-Pacific region. It would be more accurate to say that the center of escalation is already moving, and the scandalous Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is vivid proof of this. And this is just the beginning. There will be many more similar provocations ahead, which will eventually result in a big war in the region. And in this upcoming war, North Korea will be destined to take the most active part. They must be ready for this. In North Korea, they are well aware that for this purpose, they need to know the enemy's methods of conducting a modern war. Ideally, they need to have their own units proven in the battles of modern warfare. Simply put, the North Korean army needs to gain invaluable experience in modern warfare against its main geopolitical rival, the United States. And Ukraine is the only place where they can get such an experience. Secondly, it looks like the leader of North Korea has a very good historical memory. And he perfectly remembers the entire course of the Korean War in 1950. At that time, China and the Soviet Union were on the side of the DPRK. For 3 years there were fierce battles in the region. Cities repeatedly passed from hand to hand. And the war ended with the unobvious success of the DPRK. The historical memory of the past is what can help shape the future. And the Korean leader is well aware of this. Thirdly, unlike many leaders of other countries, Kim Jong-un has no fear of American military power. Everyone remembers very well how the leader of North Korea didn't step back when President Trump sent 3 aircraft carrier groups to the peninsula. Back then, the Trump administration had to back down in the face of the outbreak of war. And finally, fourthly, the Korean leader sees Russia as an ally in the coming Great War. He knows perfectly well how grateful the Russians can be. And with such a gesture of goodwill, he is going to revive and strengthen the allied relations between Russia and North Korea. This is also a strategic calculation for the future, about which, apparently, he doesn't have the slightest illusions. Obviously, in response to this gesture of goodwill, he is counting on some military technical assistance from Russia. So, I guess now Moscow and Pyongyang are discussing all this at the highest level. Russian weapons and the possibility of their use are of great interest to the leader of North Korea, especially hypersonic weapons. Whether Russia will accept military aid from North Korea is hard to say. However, it is worth recognizing that Russia could benefit from such assistance, since the Koreans have excellent and very modern artillery systems. For some reason, it is in this area that the Koreans have become very skilled. And the war in Ukraine is precisely a counter-battery artillery war. Moreover, Koreans have extensive experience in urban battles and fights in industrial agglomerations. During the last war, they took Seoul, the Million City, twice. The fact that North Korea has offered Moscow to send its army to Ukraine has caused concern in Washington. The Americans understand that if Russia accepts military assistance from North Korea and agrees to the participation of Koreans in the conflict in Ukraine, then Pyongyang's geopolitical role in the world will increase dramatically. It is obvious that North Korea is going to hit very hard, and makes it clear to its geopolitical rivals that it will be directly involved in building a new multipolar world. Thus, it becomes clear that the meeting of the leaders of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran in Beijing was fateful and significantly brought humanity closer to a multipolar world, where there will be no more wars, economic sanctions, and coups d'etat. A multipolar world is a place where people will live in justice, amicably, in harmony, and prosperity. And I hope that Donald Trump will be able to defeat the deep state, along with American globalists, and make the United States part of a multipolar world. Otherwise, Washington will share the fate of a rotting Europe, for which already nothing will help.
Plan to dominate the skies and challenge the United States. This fighter is designed for one thing: air superiority.
China unveiled not one, but two tailless stealth jets, two jets, the J-36 and the J-50. China claims they are sixth-generation aircraft.
Imagine this. Two fighter jets soar through the skies at supersonic speed. One is the pride of the United States, the F-35 Lightning II, the most expensive weapons project in history. The other, a mysterious beast from the East, the Chinese J-36, the aircraft that Western analysts still struggle to fully understand. Both are stealth fighters. Both claim to be fifth-generation masterpieces, but only one can dominate the skies in the next war. And the question is, which one? Welcome to Race to Space, the channel where we break down the future of warfare and the technology that will shape it. If you thought the F-35 was untouchable, what you're about to hear might make you question everything you've been told. Stay with us until the end, because this comparison isn't just about numbers. It's about the future of air dominance. Now, before we move on with the comparison, just think about it for a second. What if the next great aerial duel isn't between the US and Russia, but between the US and China? Picture this: a swarm of J-36 fighters approaching silently, their stealth profiles virtually invisible on radar, while F-35s scramble to respond. One wrong move, and the myth of American air superiority crumbles in a single engagement. Sounds far-fetched? Think again. Because China's J-36 isn't some prototype locked away in a hangar. It's already in advanced development, and every leak suggests it's designed to outmatch the F-35 on multiple fronts. So buckle up. We're about to break down speed, stealth, weapons, sensors, range, price,
and show you why the J-36 could very well rewrite the rulebook of aerial combat. The F-35 is famous for its stealth coating and radar-absorbing design. It's been marketed as the ultimate ghost in the sky, capable of striking before it's ever seen. But here's the catch. Stealth technology isn't magic. It depends on design angles, coatings, and electronic countermeasures. The F-35's radar cross-section, RCS, is around 0.005 square meters. Impressive, but the J-36 reportedly matches or even beats this figure thanks to cutting-edge composite materials and a slimmer radar signature optimized for both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. What makes the J-36 especially dangerous? Its 360-degree electronic warfare suite and plasma-based radar absorption tech, rumored innovations that could make it virtually untrackable to legacy radar systems. Combine that with China's quantum radar experiments, and you have a fighter designed for a battlefield where seeing first means winning first. In a head-to-head stealth contest, advantage, J-36. The F-35 is fast, but not that fast. Its top speed is around Mach 1.6, which is slower than older jets like the F-22 or even the F-15. Why? Because the F-35 prioritizes stealth and sensors over raw speed. The J-36? Reports suggest it can reach Mach 2.2 at altitude and sustain supersonic cruise without afterburners. True supercruise capability. This is a game changer because it means the J-36 can engage or disengage at will, dictating the tempo of the fight. And maneuverability? The F-35 has an advanced flight control system, but it's not a dogfighter. Its single engine limits its thrust vectoring. The J-36, however, reportedly uses twin engines with thrust vectoring nozzles, giving it extreme agility in close combat. So if it comes down to a knife fight in the clouds, the J-36 would dance circles around an F-35. Here's where the F-35 starts to sweat. Its combat radius is about 670 nautical miles. Not bad, but not great for operations over vast oceans or deep strike missions. The J-36? Estimates put its combat radius at 800 to 1,000 nautical miles, thanks to internal fuel capacity and efficient engines. Plus, China's aerial refueling fleet, including the Yu-20 tankers, makes these fighters near-endless threats in contested zones like the South China Sea. The F-35's trump card has always been its software. Its sensor fusion, helmet-mounted display, and advanced targeting systems create an unparalleled level of situational awareness. It's like flying inside an AI-powered command center. But guess what? China isn't lagging here. The J-36 reportedly integrates sixth-generation AI-driven combat assistance, giving pilots predictive analytics during dogfights. Think about that for a second. The aircraft can anticipate enemy maneuvers before they happen, reducing human reaction time by critical milliseconds. And then there's loyal wingman capability, autonomous drones that fight alongside the J-36, controlled by the same neural network. The F-35 has plans for this, but the J-36 might field it first. The F-35 carries 4 AIM-120 AMRAAMs internally, or 2 if it's flying in stealth mode. Great missiles, but the J-36 takes it further. It's rumored to carry PL-15 and PL-21 air-to-air missiles, which have ranges exceeding 200 kilometers, far beyond anything in the American arsenal. And let's not forget hypersonic compatibility. There are whispers that the J-36 will be able to launch air-launched hypersonic missiles, a nightmare scenario for U.S. carriers and bases. So in long-range engagements, the J-36 doesn't just compete, it dominates. Here's the irony. The F-35 is the most expensive weapons program in history. Each jet costs around $80 to $100 million, not counting the insane maintenance costs that can cripple smaller air forces. China's J-36? Reports suggest it could come in at $65 million or less per unit. Not only is it potentially more advanced in key areas, but it's also cheaper, meaning China can build more of them faster. This isn't just a comparison, it's a nightmare for US defense planners. What makes the J-36 truly dangerous isn't just its features, it's China's production speed. While the US struggles with cost overruns and delays, China is scaling manufacturing at a pace the Pentagon can't match. By 2030, the US might have 1,500 F-35s operational. China? It could field over 2,000 stealth fighters, including J-36s and J-35s. Imagine facing an enemy with more planes, longer range, and better weapons on their home turf. That's not a fair fight. That's an execution. So let's settle this. On stealth, close, but the J-36 edges out with newer tech. On speed and agility, J-36 hands down. On range, J-36 again. On AI and autonomy, the J-36 could leapfrog ahead by pairing with drones. The F-35 still has excellent sensors, proven combat readiness, and a strong logistics network. But wars aren't won on paper. They're won in the sky. And in a real fight over the Pacific, the J-36 wouldn't just challenge the F-35, it could crush it. This is race to space. And if this breakdown opened your eyes, you know what to do. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay locked in.
At this parade, all the weapons and equipment on display are domestically developed and in active service.
Picture the night sky over the Western Pacific. Quiet, star-salted, routine. Then an unknown track appears at the edge of a US early warning dome. It's cold, almost invisible, sliding past sensor fences like a whisper. Interceptors scramble. AWACS vectors a patrol. But by the time missiles are armed, the track has already slipped behind them, mapped their positions, and vanished. No roar, no contrails. Just a signature so faint the radar tech wonders if the machine is broken. Today, we're stepping into the most dangerous what if in modern air power. What if China's 6th generation Shenyang J-50 enters frontline service by 2028? If the rumors are right, and if China's pace holds, this single airframe could detonate the air dominance timeline, leapfrogging the West by years and reshaping the balance of power over the Pacific. This isn't fan fiction. It's a sober look at timelines, technology pillars, and procurement reality. And the conclusion is unnerving. A 2028 J-50 isn't just early, it's decisive. What if, on the first night of a crisis, the Pentagon's much-anticipated NGAD is still in low-rate development, while J-50 squadrons are already sitting alert on hardened runways? What if the US and its allies send F-35s and upgraded F-15EXs into the buzzsaw of a machine that flies farther, senses earlier, thinks faster, and decides without asking? Let that settle, because every month that slips by without a Western 6th gen in service widens the window for a Chinese first-mover advantage. And with China's rhythm of parallel prototyping, brute force manufacturing, and vertically integrated supply chains, 2028, once unthinkable, now starts to look merely aggressive rather than impossible. Hold that thought, because the cliffhanger isn't whether J-50 can fly, it's what it will do to the entire air war if it flies first. China builds combat air programs like a tech company launches phones, overlapping cycles, ruthless iteration, and production lines that don't sleep. The J-20 went from whispers to frontline combat air patrols faster than most Western planners expected. The J-35C-based stealth fighter has sprinted from mock-ups to carrier deck trials with a tempo that would give any OEM heartburn. And Shenyang's design bureau has two crucial edges: a mature stealth industrial base, coatings, edge treatments, serrated inlets, buried engines, internal bays, and flush antennas. China isn't discovering the basics anymore, it's refining them. AI-first avionics culture. The PLA is wiring airframes to work as nodes, not just jets, fusing land-based OTH radars, maritime sensors, LEO satellites, and airborne early warning into a kill web that auto-prioritizes what dies first. If Shenyang has been flight testing a large area hybrid lift stealth prototype in 2024 to 2025, as multiple rumor streams suggest, then a 2026 pre-series batch in 2028 IOC initial operational capability isn't fantasy. It's a hard push with Chinese characteristics, fast follow-on blocks, software-led upgrades, and numbers. Now here's the shocking truth. The West loves prototypes, whereas China loves fleets, a J-50 that reaches the initial operational capability by the year 2028. And surprisingly, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be present in quantity. China's airframe economics are brutal and effective. CNC lines that pivot between variants, state-backed suppliers willing to carry inventory, and an engine program that advances in visible blocks, not promises. Even if the first J-50 batch ships with interim engines, say approximately 180 to 200 kilonewtons class, combined thrust with efficient, low observable inlets, the airframe can be mated to a follow-on variable cycle or high-efficiency turbofan once it's ready. That's how you outrun Western all-or-nothing perfectionism. Field early, iterate often. If China can roll out 2 to 3 airframes per month by the year 2027 and scale to 4 to 6 per month by the year 2027-2028, you are looking at 2 wings worth of metal by the time Western 6th gens are still arguing over unit costs. Because let me tell you a universal fact here. In a war in the skies, presence beats promise. As mentioned earlier, China just needs to be present in the air, on the battlefield. And that's why hardware wins the first dogfight. Data wins the war. China's advantage is not just avionics. It's a national sensor fabric feeding training loops. Coastal OTH arrays, theater ISR constellations, passive RF pickets, and frontline EW logs, all poured into model training. The J-50's brain doesn't rely on one manufacturer's lab. It drinks from a continental pipeline of PLA exercises, naval shadowing, and border intercepts. Western jets are integrating AI co-pilots. China is integrating an AI doctrine. That's the difference between a clever gadget and a thinking fleet. NGAD and allied 6th gen efforts are real. They will come, but they're also trapped in a vice. Congressional oversight, multi-partner cost splits, engine choices that ripple across budgets, and exquisite requirements that force zero-fail solutions. China's recipe is simpler. Fly sooner, accept Block 0 limits, and push Block 1 within 18 to 24 months. Keep the outer mold line stable. Swap the brain often. Build enough that pilots train to new timelines, not old myths. The painful truth for the West? If J-50 achieves meaningful operational status by 2028, even in limited numbers, it will be teaching Chinese pilots a 6th gen playbook while Western pilots are still simulating it. When it comes to power, interim engines might not hit the holy grail of variable cycle efficiency on day 1, but with weight budgets trimmed by materials discipline and sensor fusion replacing legacy boxes, the thrust to weight can still be nasty, especially in thin, cold cruise altitudes over the Pacific. When talking about agility, don't picture airshow tumbles. Picture energy maneuverability at super cruise and post-stall rescue modes enabled by vectoring and AI envelope protection. A human pilot with a machine guardian can live in areas of the flight map that used to be labeled "Don't you dare." Now, discussing the price, the unit cost is the nuclear bomb in this conversation. If China lands a flyaway cost below the psychological red line that has haunted Western programs, the J-50 becomes not just a silver bullet, but a bronze spear, affordable enough to multiply. 24 exquisite jets don't win theaters. 80 do. Truth be told, dates matter. 2028 sits at the overlap of several clocks. Western fleets will still rely heavily on 5th Gen Plus. Allied air forces will be in the middle of upgrades, not completions. Hypersonic defense will be immature. U.S. basing resilience in the Pacific will still be building out. Drop an operational J-50 into that calendar, and you don't just move the goalposts, you flip the field. This is race to space. If you want us to break down the likely J-50 weapons bay loadouts, the AI co-pilot stack, or the loyal wingman pairings we think are coming with it, drop a comment. Smash subscribe if you believe air dominance in the 2030s will belong to whoever flies 6th Gen first. Because if 2028 belongs to the J-50, the next decade of the sky might already be spoken for.
The reason I say this has to do with the pipeline, Siberia 2, that they've effectively agreed upon. They have been talking about this pipeline for apparently years. And
a decade
yeah,
plus.
It's been a long time. And they finally have made the agreement to send this pipeline. It's going to go all the way through Mongolia, eventually to China from Siberia. The gas is, and in fact, it is going to effectively replace the energy that was going to Europe. And it's now
that's the important thing.
Yes, which means Europe is not going to be able to get their hands on that particular energy once the pipeline is established, built, and the pipeline is running. What does this mean for Europe? And I'm saying this in the context of a Europe where France seems to be potentially having to get an IMF loan. Britain may have to get an IMF loan. Germany auto industry is going in the toilet. France industry, I think Michelin has just closed up one of its stores that had been open for decades. These are not indications of success. And yet, no more soup for you going forward.
Yeah. So, you know, this big SCO summit, right, with these incredible visuals, right, all this, the symbolism of Modi holding the hands of Putin and Xi Jinping. And it was really quite interesting because the Western media, which has studiously ignored every SCO and BRICS summit for the past decade. They just freaked out over this one now because not only was Putin there, but Modi had just come under pressure from the U.S. and had refused to bend. You know, here was, what they continually call the leader of the biggest democracy in the world, standing with the great authoritarians, as they tried to depict Russia and China against the U.S. And quite flagrantly. I mean, Modi was tweeting out a storm and grabbing Putin's hand, and grabbing Xi Jinping's hands, and he was being very demonstrative. And there was even Bild, the German rag. I mean, technically it's a popular newspaper in Germany, called it the villainy summit. The red carpet rolled out for the villainy summit, right? You know, this childish Manichaean, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys narrative. But I guess Modi's suddenly the bad guy now because he sided against them. And I mean, that should tell you something. Increasingly, we're seeing these two geopolitical blocks. And there was, I would say, an accomplishment, a new SCO development bank, right, to parallel the BRICS new development bank was announced. And that's going to be important. I mean, banks, development bank, things like the IMF and the World Bank, parallel institutions to that. People often, place little importance. And I have to say, I'm guilty of that as well. When it comes to big geopolitics and international relations, but money does make the world go around to a very great deal, and so these things are important. But other than that,
the single biggest concrete development to come out of all of this was not anything declared by the SCO, but a bilateral deal finally struck by Russia and China. And that is the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. And it will run from the Yamal Peninsula in western Siberia, from gas fields that had been sourcing to Nord Stream 1 and 2. And now that energy will be going across Russia through Mongolia and into northeastern China. So it's a big deal. It is significant quantities of gas. And they're already talking that it will take a few years to construct this, but they're already talking that once this is done, they want to expand both the Power of Siberia 1, which already exists, coming from different gas fields in eastern Siberia. They want to expand both of them. And then there are potential discussions about turning China into a hub and then transiting that gas on to the Koreas, Southeast Asia, even potentially India, right? Because otherwise, they got to go through the Himalayas, and I'm thinking that that's pretty in terms of industry. That's gonna be pretty difficult. So I mean, it's all out there, right? Russia is becoming the big gas supplier, not for Europe anymore, but for Eurasia. And that's huge, and it will tie the countries there closer together. I've always said, whether we're talking oil or gas, pipelines are geopolitics in solid form. They are, the bones. They pump the blood of states through them, and they make it, not impossible for ruptures. We just saw, in order to break the relationship between Russia and Europe permanently, the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipelines to finally sever that completely. No option of going back. No easy option anyway. So that shows how important they are. And for China, this means energy security for their continued growth into the future. That is not susceptible to attacks by U.S. or any allied or proxy state naval forces. For Russia, this means security as a producer, right, of a partner that is not, for geopolitical or even political reasons, suddenly going to turn on you and start sanctioning you or
blowing up the pipelines.
Yeah, blowing up the pipelines or whatever. And for Europe, this means that the gas that had made the European export economies, particularly Germany, but everyone else as well, because where Germany goes, everyone else goes, competitive. The relatively cheap, reliable pipeline gas is now gone. There's no going backsies on this. There's no rebuilding. There's nothing. And that means that for the foreseeable future, right, until a sci-fi future where we get nuclear fusion to work, right, they're going to be bidding for expensive American or Qatari or whoever's LNG. And that means their economies, and China's economy was already more competitive than theirs.
Yes.
Right. Labor costs and everything. Now that is going to be, I don't know, doubled. I don't have the exact math there, but it is going to be increased. While everything they do is now, which is why there's so many headlines in the Western media about the deindustrialization of Germany, energy costs, right? And on top of that, all of these energy costs, and altogether, the blowback of these sanctions have led to I don't think it's just a basket case to describe European economies as a basket case. does not begin to translate the severity of what's going on. It is a crisis, right? And a potential catastrophe. Not some outside critics, but the officials, right, in the finance ministries of the UK and the France this week revealed that their situation was so bad that they might have to consider IMF bailout loans to just keep their governments afloat. That's how deep in debt and in bankruptcy they are, even as they announce billions more in aid for the Kiev regime in Ukraine. It's just it's amazing, but they will literally drive their countries into the ground and their own people into the poorhouse over this geopolitical and ideological fixation that Ukraine is NATO territory now, and they will fight for it, to the bitter end, and that's exactly what they are doing. And the energy costs are a huge part of it. They're not the only part, but they're a huge part of everything that has led up to this. And these aren't statesmen. I mean, these are clowns. These are the people that are on one hand complete vassals of the United States, and on the other hand, quite often the tail wagging that dog, to the war. They are, in essence, the political elite in Europe are at times even greater true believers in U.S.-led Western global hegemony than many of the people in the current U.S. administration are. They're fanatics. Their sense of Western exceptionalism, their supremacist and messianic belief that their societies are structurally, societally, and above all, morally superior to every other country on earth, civilization, state, what have you. And therefore, they have not just the right, but the duty to rule the world. And you saw the visual parallels of this sad group of European clowns driving their countries into extinction on one side in many different ways, and the future of the multipolar world, the visuals on full display over the last week. And the Western newspapers recognized that for the first time. They pointed exactly that out in CNN and BBC and other sources. Now, obviously not using the exact same terminology I did, but in some cases, yes. It's all leading somewhere, and it's leading to a quicker end to U.S.-led Western global hegemony than it might be otherwise. And it was, the current U.S. administration that did this, right, to this degree in this last week, because the U.S. had spent decades, right, wooing India, right, to use them as a proxy against China, right? The whole beginning of the use of the Indo-Pacific term, right? This is a made-up term that was never used before, all right? And I studied in the U.S. or the U.S. military. No one ever used the term Indo-Pacific, right? That's something that came about in the last decade as part of the narrative, the attempt to lure India into their quote unquote containment of China, the Quad and everything else. And Trump blew it all in a few months. And of course, maybe it's early days to say this, maybe a next US administration will suddenly come back. Oh, we made mistakes. Let's go back out. Let's go on a date again. That sort of thing. That can happen, right? It's always best to be a bit cynical about geopolitical changes like this. But for this moment, it's quite stunning. And the implications of it, if it indeed continues down this path, are enormous. With India, the most populous country in the world, right there in the middle of Eurasia, on their side, then there was a chance. But with Russia and China and India and Iran and North Korea and all these other countries together, then there was a recognition, that even in the Western media, that we don't stand a chance.
Yeah,
that was said.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Like, you would think that self-preservation alone, would have been like, okay, let's work with India. India is going to be in BRICS. That's our gateway to try to work. And try to put the kibosh on BRICS. That's not the way he thought. Western exceptionalism.
It's hubris, right?
Yeah,
it was amazing. Navarro said that India was arrogant in not doing what they said, right?
Yes,
and stopping trade with Russia. And I'm like,
India's
arrogant? Yeah. India's arrogant, right? You're dictating who they can and can't trade with, right? I mean, who's arrogant? It is the arrogance that has led to this. First, they pushed Russia and China together, right? Then they pushed Russia and China and Iran together, right? Remember Joe Biden saying, who are you going to turn to? You're going to turn to China about Russia and shoving NATO down Russia's throat. That video back in the 80s. Who are you going to, or 90s, sorry. Who are you going to turn to? China? Iran? Why don't you turn to Iran while you're at it, right? And of course that came true. That is, an epithet of Joe Biden's, foreign policy life, I think, that should be immortalized in video on his gravestone. But now India as well, right? And it's not just them, the host of other countries that were even Erdogan slinking around the outsides of this there, despite being in NATO. Even pro-Western leader of Armenia, Pashinyan, was there, right? Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of lurking on the outside of seeing a new center of gravity of the world. It's long been forming, but there was, an acceptance of that this weekend. And it was India, in defiance of the US, that I think finally brought it home, joining, the rest of them there, so defiantly that was clear. And we have to remember that while the SCO is a Eurasian focused organization, right? Geopolitically, it is Eurasian focused. With BRICS, which is shall we say, a parallel multipolar institution, then you start bringing in countries from around the wider world, right? Even in the US's quote unquote own Western hemisphere, Brazil, Venezuela, South Africa, you start bringing in these up. Venezuela's not technically a part of the BRICS yet, but anyway, you get the idea. Yeah. That there are countries around the world, not just on the Eurasian supercontinent. It is. I mean, a lot of it is symbolism and aspiration and intent. But then when you have deals like the new SCO Development Bank and this power of Siberia, that is concrete, right? It's not sexy, right? Doesn't grab headlines like a new conflict or, I don't know, shooting down US drones somewhere or something like this. But at the end of the day, the long, slow work of building alternative global institutions to those by the West, right? And the re-threading, right? The rewiring of these energy networks that are the lifeblood of states and the world. That is, at the end of the day, more important, even if it's not as sexy. And that's what we saw. We saw the symbolism and we saw the rhetoric, but we saw concrete actions as well, and that's important to me. That's the distinction between Rio was still kind of a talking shop. There wasn't anything concrete agreed, and I was quick to voice that at the time. I'll because the cynic that I am, these are real things, and they matter to me. Those are things that can't be easily undone. And I mean, they can be undone. Nord Stream, right? But yeah, they are actual actions, and they matter. So I was very pleased, on an ideological level, to see these concrete, results of these big meetings, as well as all the symbolism and aspiration.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I thought it was a big deal too. Mark, my man.
Kofi, follow me.